Chapter 55. If you want to dissect, isn't there one here? Sham pointed to the living room. There was an old undead lying there. It should be the owner of the house. Dean shook his head slightly. I want to dissect the recently dead ones. I want to speculate from their behavior. As for the ones that have been killed by hunters, I will dissect them to see what changes will happen to their bodies after they die. I'll go with you. Zack gritted his teeth. Dean nodded slightly and immediately equipped his dagger. He pushed open the door and went down the corridor with Zack. One of the corridors collapsed, but it wasn't difficult for the two of them. They could directly jump over the first floor of the corridor. Soon, the two came to the ground floor and looked outside. They saw the undead were led away by Mason and Sham. They immediately opened the door and ran to the side of the corner. They immediately saw 3 corpses piled up on the ground. Although their heads were broken, there was no blood flowing out. Dean grabbed the undead that he had stabbed to death. He whispered to Zack to help. Zack's face was pale. No one wanted to get close to this terrible, bloodthirsty monster. But he still resisted the fear in his heart and went forward to support the other arm of the undead. Dean was not worried about being infected with the virus and radiation of the undead. He carried it back to the building with Zack. The undead was heavier than Dean imagined. It looked like a skinny young man, but it felt like a fat man that weighed 200 or 300 pounds. Fortunately, he had been blessed twice. His strength was more than 3 times that of an adult. Otherwise, it would be extremely difficult to move the undead. Soon, the two of them moved the corpse to the floor where the stairs had collapsed, which was the 9th floor. Dean put down the undead and went to the room to check again. He didn't see any hidden rats or other dangers, so he moved the undead in. The original owner of the room had died, and the blood on the ground had long been covered with dust. There was the body of a teenage boy lying on the ground. Judging from the long nails, it was also an undead. Not far from the body of the boy, under the table, there was a corpse. The hair was very long. It was obviously a woman. The flesh and blood were rotten, and the corpse was also very dark due to the radiation. Dudian went to the bedroom and took out some moldy and rotten quilts. He covered the corpses on the ground to cover the pungent smell of corpses. Then he asked Zack to sweep away the scattered items in the living room to make an open space. At this time, Sham saw that the two didn't return for a long time, so he ran down. He was relieved to see them in the room, but soon he looked at the undead in front of Dean's feet. He trembled. Really want to dissect it? Dean nodded firmly. If it was before today, he would never dare to dissect a human body. But now, after seeing the bloody scene of the previous gnawing and seeing Scott and other desperate people running past him, he gradually understood that if he wanted to live, he could only rely on himself. No one could protect him, except for the sharp knife in his hand. Dean held the dagger and gently poked the claws of the undead. Suddenly, he saw that the surface of the dark and sharp claws was incomparably hard, as cold and hard as black iron. When the dagger stabbed the surface, it was like stabbing steel. This is the evolved tissue of a creature. Dean was secretly shocked. In addition to the claws, the undead saws were also growing like sharp claws. The pitch-black cuticle covered most of the saws, looking extremely hideous. Dean looked at the chest of the undead. There was still a trace of timidity in his heart. He took a deep breath, clenched his teeth, and stabbed. Puff! The dagger pierced into the belly of the undead, but no blood sputtered out. Dean was relieved. To be honest, if he saw the blood oozing out, he felt that he would vomit. After all, Scott also said that the so-called undead were infected humans. Dean slightly moved the dagger to the side. He saw the tissue of the incision. His face slightly changed. He saw that under the gray skin, there was brown flesh. The blood seemed to solidify in the flesh. To be precise, it seemed to be frozen inside. Frozen? Dean vaguely thought that the body of the undead was exceptionally cold. Not only did it not have the slightest temperature that a living creature should have, but it was cold like an ice cube. No wonder there was no sign of decay under such a freezing temperature. However, Dean saw that the other undead killed by the hunters had serious signs of decay, especially the female undead that died in the bathroom. Her face and body were completely rotten. Thinking of this, Dean could not help but look at the body of the boy in the room. He immediately went forward to check. Like the other dead undead, the boy's head was also destroyed. It was split from the middle into two. It should have been cut by a very tough and sharp sword. He could not see the original appearance. The boy's neck, arms, chest, and other parts showed signs of decay. The skin was swollen like blisters. Dean used the dagger to gently poke the rotten skin like tofu. The tip of the dagger easily penetrated it. Dark red blood oozed out. Dean smelled the strong corpse odor exuded from the body. His stomach was bursting with nausea. At the same time, he was at a loss. Why would these undead rot like humans after death and emit the same stench? Were these undead really alive? If they were alive, why there was no consciousness? Even the basic instincts that a living creature should have. Dean silently pondered, then got up and went back to the previous undead. He opened its eyelids. It had a Western face, but the eyes were green. There seemed to be countless fibers in the pupils. Did they rely on these eyes to track their prey? Dean was silent. He used the dagger to gently cut the end of the nose. Inch by inch, the raised nose was flattened, revealing two dark nostrils. Dean looked at it and slightly frowned. He turned its head sideways and cut off its ears. He dug a vortex with its ears as the center. This process made Zack and Sham pale. Their legs trembled. They were not afraid of the undead, but Dean's expression. It was a very focused, very serious expression. This kind of expression made them feel a heartfelt chill from the bottom of their hearts. They were more afraid than facing a living undead. Even after many years, they still could not forget this scene. At this time, Dean hollowed out the ears of the undead and immediately saw that the ears were full of thick dust. He felt strange in his heart. These undead had not dug out earwax for more than 300 years. Their ears had long been accumulated with layers of dust, just like stuffing ear cotton. Their hearing should be very weak. Why were they so sensitive to sound? Could it be that they had evolved a new organ to replace their sense of hearing? Dean pondered for a moment. He pushed the undead's chin and looked at its tongue. The tongue had long been broken. It seemed that it was stabbed when biting prey. It could be seen that the undead really did not know how to protect themselves. It also did not feel pain. Thinking of this, Dean was startled. He remembered that when Scott killed the undead, he used a dagger to nail the undead's head. The undead screamed, and its body kept twitching. Since it did not feel pain, why did it have such a reaction? His eyes flashed for a moment. Suddenly, he waved the dagger and cut the undead's mouth from both sides. His palms pressed down hard. Soon, the undead's entire jaw was abruptly cut off by him, but there was still no trace of blood. Dean immediately cut off its head. From the cut of the chin, he looked inside the head. Inside was the upper cavity and cold flesh. He slightly frowned. He was somewhat embarrassed, but he remembered that there were two spare ones downstairs. He immediately clenched his teeth and used the dagger to stab inside. He rotated and stirred. The flesh and brain cells inside were crushed. Then he knocked the head on the floor to knock out all the crushed tissues. Suddenly, a hard object rolled out from the head. It fell to the ground and hit the shoulder of the undead. It was a thumb-sized, perfectly round dark blue ball. Chapter 56. Dean, Sham and Zack's eyes fell on the dark blue ball. They couldn't help but be startled. In the skull, a ball fell out. The ball was a natural, perfect circle, and the color was dark blue. Obviously, it was not a hard skull tissue, but a blue metal ball. But how could there be metal in the brain? Dean was surprised, but he didn't touch it with his hand. Instead, he used his dagger to poke the ball. The dagger tip immediately slipped, and the ball rolled down to the broken neck of the undead. So hard, Dean's eyes moved. The activity of hard objects was poor, and the speed of infection was slow. Moreover, it would not penetrate like a liquid. He had gloves to isolate it, so a simple touch should not be a big deal. He immediately reached out and picked it up. As soon as he grabbed the dark blue ball, Dean's whole body quivered. There was only one feeling in his fingers: cold. Extremely cold. It was like holding an ice ball. He couldn't help but think of the frozen blood in the corpse. Was it because of this dark blue ball? At this time, the cold seemed to spread, climbing along the dark blue ball to Dean's arm. He felt the temperature of his whole arm was dropping rapidly, and it was a little stiff. He could not help but put the dark blue ball on the other hand. Soon, the other hand also felt a little frozen. At the same time, Dean felt cold all over his body, as if he was in the black snow season, extremely cold. How can it be? Even if both hands are holding a piece of ice, it's only the hands that are frozen. How can my whole body feel cold? I feel the cold from the soles of my feet. Dean was surprised. It was like playing with a snowball in winter. At most, the hands were cold, but the body was warm. But at the moment, he felt cold all over, as if his whole body was stuck to a piece of ice. He immediately put the dark blue ball on the ground, rubbed his hands together, and breathed. He felt a little warm, but soon he felt hungry. He had not eaten anything since he came out of the giant wall. He suppressed his hunger and looked at the dark blue ball in puzzlement. Suddenly, he thought of a reason. Heat absorption. Dean woke up. This dark blue ball will absorb heat, just like saltpeter and black gunpowder. Saltpeter is not only one of the raw materials of black gunpowder, but also can make ice. In this world, most alchemists have mastered the use of saltpeter to make ice, but they haven't found that saltpeter mixed with sulfur can explode. Saltpeter to make ice was because it absorbed the heat in the water, so the water turned into ice. Just now, he felt his whole body was cold. Obviously, this dark blue ball had the same heat absorption function as saltpeter. If he held it in his hand, it would absorb heat along the arm until the body heat was absorbed. Then the body temperature would drop. When it dropped to a certain level, the heartbeat would stop and the body would freeze to death. No wonder the body temperature of these undead are so low, so cold. It turned. No wonder this undead body temperature is so low, so cold. It was because of this thing. But how can it appear in the undead's brain? Dean was full of curiosity. If someone was implanted into their brain, then naturally it was impossible. After all, there were so many undead. How would it take a lot of energy and time to implant one by one? If it's not artificial, then it's its own growth. However, although the undead are virus-infected humans, after all, they are flesh and blood. How can they grow such a hard metal object and have such strange characteristics? Dean felt strange. At this time, a figure suddenly jumped down from the stairs. It immediately alarmed the few people in the room. When they saw that it was Macon, they were relieved. Mason was relieved when he saw that all three of them were there. He said, "Scared me to death. I almost thought that something happened to you down there." Sham scratched his head. "I was watching Dean's dissection. I forgot to inform you." Zach reacted and hurriedly said, "You came down? What about the undead?" Mason rolled his eyes and said, "Of course, I came back. I'm tired. Who can replace me? I'll go." Sham looked at the head of the undead that was beheaded. He felt his stomach churning. Dean's thoughts were interrupted by Mason. He continued to think about it, but there was no clue. He could not help but sigh. He no longer continued to dwell on this aspect. The most important thing was to survive. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He immediately said to Zach and Mason, "Come with me. Let's go downstairs." Both of them had some doubts, but still followed. Dean went downstairs and saw that the group of undead outside had been led away. He immediately sneaked to the corner and cut off the heads of the two dead undead. Then he carried their heads back to the building. Mason and Zach immediately retreated. He smiled and said, "It's okay. They are dead." Mason was horrified. "You, when did you become so bold?" "I'll adapt to it." Dean went back upstairs. According to the previous method, he split the heads of the two undeads. Because the heads of the two undeads were already cracked, he easily cut them open. As he expected, there was an identical dark blue orb inside. When cutting the third head, Dean suddenly thought of a problem. He immediately stopped the previous rough cutting method. Instead, he slowly opened the head along the cracked position of the skull. Soon, he saw the inside of the skull. As he expected, the brain tissue was extremely cold, as if it had been frozen. The dark blue ball was lying in the brain tissue package. However, probably because the skull was cracked, the brain tissue in the dark blue ball was somewhat damaged. Dean carefully searched for a while and soon understood that this dark blue ball was the main reason for controlling the actions of the undead. The so-called destruction of the head could kill the undead. There were two principles. The first was to destroy the central nervous system in the head so that the head could not control the body. The second was to destroy the connection between the dark blue ball and the brain tissue in the head. In short, this dark blue ball was like an ovary in the brain tissue. It was not necessary to destroy the head to kill the undead. As long as there was a strong shock, the dark blue ball would be shaken out of the ovary of the brain tissue. The dark blue ball would lose contact with the nerves in the ovary wall. Then the undead would stop moving. In other words, the undead would be killed. After understanding this point, Dean was more and more puzzled. What was this dark blue ball? Why would it grow in the brain of the undead? Was it a virus? So wasn't this dark blue ball a virus condensation? Thinking of this, Dean immediately picked up the dark blue ball and wrapped it into a fist-sized ball. He slightly relaxed and then handed two to Mason and Zach. This thing can absorb body temperature. It will help us to reduce body temperature. But don't hold it. It will absorb body temperature. It is best to put it in the backpack. Mason and Zach were surprised to see the two things wrapped in layers. Mason curiously asked, "What is this?" "I don't know." However, after the hunters killed the undead, they would dig out this thing from their heads. This shows that it should be very valuable. Otherwise, the hunters would not turn a blind eye to things like gold and dig out this thing. Dean said he had seen a lot of undead with their heads split open, but there was no such thing in the head. It was obvious that the hunters had picked it up. Mason was shocked. "You said that the hunters kill the undead for this." Chapter 57. This thing has a heat absorption characteristic. It proves that my previous speculation is correct. These undeads are likely to be affected by it. They will sense our body temperature and gradually gather here. The way they hunt is not by tracking the smell of blood, but by tracking the heat. Dudian secretly thought. Scott's team has a large number of people. The heat produced by them is even more amazing. It should attract more undeads. In other words, there's a very large number of undeads in the area number 8. This is by no means caused by the hunters. It is likely that they have moved from other areas. Dudian frowned as he thought of this. Previously, he had glanced at Scott's map. He remembered that there was a gray area near the area number 8. There were several green and blue areas, which were the hunting areas of other consortiums. Dudian said to Mason and Zach, "This thing can help us reduce our body temperature. We can get rid of the undead's tracking. However, we still can't get too close to them. We have to find a way to hunt an undead's and dig out the cold ball in its brain. Only then we can get rid of the undead's tracking." Mason was surprised. "With this thing, we can get rid of the undead's tracking. How can we hunt them? They're too strong. We're not their opponents." Zach asked. Dudian smiled. "We humans are not strong in fighting, but in wisdom. We can't confront them head-on, but we can use their lack of IQ to easily kill them." Easily? Zach and Mason looked at each other in a daze. 3 years of training taught scavengers how to search for prey in the wilderness and how to survive in a variety of environments. But it didn't teach them how to hunt, because that was the hunter's job. Therefore, although they had been trained, but faced with such a problem, Mason and Zach were completely at a loss. But compared to other ordinary children, they didn't panic and collapse. It was very rare. The simplest way is to use fire. Dudian smiled. "You go and find some cloth. As long as the cloth can be ignited, the more the better. I will replace Sham and lead them to a place. I will give you 10 minutes to gather the cloth downstairs." Mason and Zach's eyes lit up. They immediately guessed what Dean wanted to do. They quickly left the room and went to each floor to look for combustibles. Dean went back upstairs and saw that Sham was still tirelessly throwing stones. "You take a break, I'll do it." Sham replied, "No, I could do this kind of rough work. Whether we can leave this place or not, it's all up to you." Dudian laughed. "Mason and Zach are going to take care of it. They will be able to leave here soon. Everything is ready." "What do you mean?" Sham blankly asked. Dean shook his head and smiled. "Nothing. Everything is ready. I will finish the rest of the work. You go upstairs and find some stones. Don't empty this floor or it will collapse." Then he grabbed the gravel on the ground and looked at the wandering corpses at the entrance of the community. He suddenly found that the number of these corpses had increased by a few more. In the distance, there seemed to be a single corpse staggering over. Dean immediately grabbed the stone and threw it to the other side of the building, leading the undeads to the other side. 10 minutes later, Mason and Zach gathered the combustibles in the open space under the building and formed a circle. At this time, Dean continued to throw stones or glass into the open space in the center of the circle. The violent sound immediately attracted the attention of the group of undeads. They immediately staggered over and entered the center of the circle. At this time, Mason, who had received Dean's order in advance, immediately threw lit torches from the second floor. 4 or 5 torches tumbled down from the air and fell on the combustibles. Due to the relatively close height, only one of the 5 torches fell. The other 4 fell on the clothes. The flames burned along with the clothes and soon ignited the whole circle. The clothes and rotten wood furniture were burned together into a raging fire. The undeads in the center of the burning circle seemed to have an instinctive awareness to avoid the flames. They immediately ran out of the circle when the flames burned. Seeing this, Dean's face slightly changed. He immediately continued to throw stones and glass to attract the undeads with violent sound. However, the undead's awareness of fire was particularly strong. The sound couldn't attract them. Dean's face changed. He hurriedly shouted downstairs, "Bring the fire to them." Mason, Zach, and Sham were surprised for a moment. They immediately implemented the second set of backup plan prepared by Dean. That was to ignite the undeads. This plan was originally worried that the burning circle would not burn the undeads inside. They were ready to add fire to their bodies. But now it happened to come in handy. The 3 quickly picked up some bed sheets and other clothes on the ground and threw them downstairs to the undeads inside the burning circle. Soon the undeads were hit by the clothes. Although they were not injured, but when they ran out of the burning circle covered with bed sheets and quilts, they were ignited by the fire. Dean breathed a sigh of relief and watched quietly. It didn't take long for the flames to extinguish. There were 7 or 8 charred corpses lying in the burning circle. The rest of the undeads fell outside the burning circle. Some of them were not ignited by the flames. They fled hundreds of meters away and continued to stagger and approach. Dean immediately threw stones to lead them to the distance. Then he let Sham come over and continued to use sound to lead them away. He went downstairs and was ready to call Mason and Zach to collect the corpses. Suddenly, he saw one of the arms of the undeads. It seemed that it was slightly raised. He could not help but be shocked. Didn't the flames burn them? The bodies are burnt, but the dark blue ball in the head can control them. Dean's face changed. He called Mason and Zach to continue to throw combustibles to cover the bodies of the undeads to make the fire more vigorous. After burning for 7 or 8 minutes, Dean carefully observed the undeads for a while. He threw stones to the center of the undeads. There was no reaction. He was relieved and called Mason and Zach to collect the corpses. The 3 of them came downstairs. When Sham was leading the rest of the undeads away, they immediately used cloth and gloves to drag the charred corpses downstairs and cut off their heads. Mason and Zach gradually loosened their courage and tried to cut off the heads of the charred corpses. Soon, the heads of the charred corpses were cut off, a total of 8 heads. Dean directly cut open their heads and saw that the tissues in their skulls had softened. However, what surprised Dean was that the dark blue ball in their skulls was also melting. At this moment, it had melted from the size of a thumb to the size of a soybean, and the melted liquid was translucent like water. The color of the melted liquid was dark blue. This dark blue ball is afraid of high temperature? Dean was stunned. Chapter 58. Dean quickly cut off the other heads. He saw that the dark blue balls were in a melting state. He was confused. Wasn't this thing supposed to absorb heat? How could it melt to high temperature? Could it be that this was the purpose of it absorbing heat? Although he was puzzled, Dean quickly used his dagger to pick them out. They rolled to the ground outside the head. The dark blue balls stopped melting after leaving the scalding temperature of the skull. Dean's eyes fell on the melted light blue liquid. As time passed, the temperature of the cranial tissues gradually decreased. The color of the light blue liquid gradually became thicker. The next moment, Dean, Mason, and Zach were horrified. The light blue liquid was like a living liquid. It twisted and shrank back into a mass. It slowly condensed into a dark blue ball. Dean was completely stunned. This scene gave him a familiar feeling. It was like water freezing into ice. The dark blue balls seemed to have such characteristics, but didn't need to wait until the temperature reached 0 to freeze. Moreover, it had an efficient heat absorption characteristic. Dean looked at the dark blue balls. He felt as if a dark blue eyeball was staring at him. He had a creepy feeling, although he didn't know what it was and why it would appear in the brain of the undead. But he felt that it was extremely dangerous. It was an instinct. Of course, it could also be a wrong intuition due to the influence of the scene. In any case, Dean didn't want to get too much contact with this thing. He thought that he would have to study this thing in his exclusive alchemy laboratory. This terrible virus made him feel that he had entered the freezer 300 years ago. He seemed to have missed something. Only by thoroughly studying the virus could he know one or two things. Mason looked at Dean lost in thought. He whispered, "Dean, can this thing still be used?" Dean looked at him and said, "Yes, but be careful. Wrap it in cloth and isolate it far away." Mason happily nodded. He immediately found the cloth and picked up the dark blue balls and wrapped in the cloth. Dean also picked up one. The cold feeling came again. It was the same as before. He was relieved. In any case, this thing could help them avoid the heat detection of the undead. Continue to arrange the burning circle. Dean put away all the balls and said to Mason and Zach. Mason said, "Do we have to kill these undead? We can go around them." Dean shook his head slightly. The hunters didn't pick up the gold but took out this thing. It shows that the value of this thing is higher than the gold jewelry. So we can hunt as many as we can. This is a lot of wealth. Both of them were surprised. Zach patted his thigh. "Yes, we are now doing the hunter's work." "Ha ha ha." Mason laughed. Fortunately, Dean is smart. This is a good way to make money. Although these undeads are terrible, but they are stupid. It is too easy to kill them. Let's kill this batch and continue to look for other undeads to hunt. Don't pick up anything. Those broken metals are certainly not valuable. Don't pick up those broken metal things. It is certainly not as valuable. Dean rolled his eyes. Dean thought of Mason. Dean was scared. The three of them cleaned up and continued to burn the corpses. Half an hour later, all the wandering undead outside the community were killed by them, using the burning circle. In addition to the previous 3 undead, they harvested a total of 21 dark blue balls. Where are we going next? Mason was carrying a backpack of dark blue balls. He excitedly said, "Go to the gray area that Scott said. It has not been cleaned. There must be a lot of undead." Dean was speechless. "Are you crazy? Didn't you see how many undeads were killed by hunters on the street? If you go to the gray area, you'll be surrounded by a sea of undeads before you can arrange anything. Don't think about money." Mason listened to him and recalled the number of undead along the way. He suddenly shivered and his face turned pale. Zach sighed and said, "Dean is right. It is too risky to go to the gray area. Moreover, there are certainly more bone rats than here. These beasts are not brainless like undead." Sham whispered, "Let's go find Scott and the others. They have a map and know the way back. Moreover, there should be a lot of undeads being led away by them. We can go and help them and kill those undeads." Dean nodded. "Let's do it. Let's eat something to replenish our physical strength." They were so tired from the previous battle that they didn't have time to rest. At this moment, when they heard this, they all felt their stomachs growling. They immediately opened their respective backpacks and took out their dry rations and water to eat. However, 3 years of training had taught them temperance. Everyone nibbled a few mouthfuls and drank a little water. They stopped because they didn't find a new source of food. The things in the backpack were likely to be their food for 10 days. When they were ready to set off again, a figure suddenly ran from the street outside the community. The speed of this figure was extremely fast. When he saw the corner in front of him, he immediately jumped up and directly jumped over the top of the security booth next to the residential area. After landing, he didn't stop and went into the residential area. He leaned against a wall and gasped for breath. This scene suddenly fell into the eyes of Zach, who was on sentry duty. "Dean, come over and see." Zach quickly called out to Dean. Dean was surprised for a moment, but quickly walked over. He saw the location that Zach was pointing at. There was a youth in black armor on the ground floor. There was a black bow on his back and a quiver on his back. He looked like a silent ghost archer. However, the way he covered his right arm revealed that he was injured at the moment. "Hunter," Dean was startled. When Zach, Mason, and Sham heard his words, they couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Then they suddenly reacted. Their group of scavengers didn't wear such attire. Moreover, the collective configuration of the scavengers was a dagger. This dagger wasn't used for fighting, but to peel bark or to cut things that needed to be cut when scavenging. In the definition of consortium, scavengers didn't need to fight. If they encountered monsters that hadn't been cleaned up, they could only run. If they could run away, then they would be lucky. If they couldn't run away, then they would die. Just like cannon fodder on the battlefield. Their only role was to consume the enemy's ammunition, not to take the enemy's head and bring victory. Every position was assigned a value within its own function. This was management. Hunter, Mason, Zach, and Sham were excited. For scavengers like them, hunters were an unattainable existence. They were the real existences comparable to the nobles. They were qualified to discuss conditions with the nobles. And they were scavengers. Throughout their life, they were just scavengers. Good or bad, high or low, nothing more than looking at the value of the materials they scavenged. But no matter how high the value they created, they would only be scavengers because they didn't have the light physique. This was something that couldn't be changed. The consortium would cultivate Dean as a seed. In addition to his scavenger training results, they mainly investigated his resume. His body radiation content was the same as the hunter's light physique. That was why the consortium was willing to give him the opportunity to become a hunter. Otherwise, no matter how high the value Dean created for the consortium was, he was doomed to be a scavenger. Dean wasn't happy because he had seen hunters. After coming to the giant wall, he saw the ruins and the bloody scene of corpses all over the place. He understood that these hunters who fought in such an environment all year round were not good people. This was why Fino almost killed him, because he told him about the hunters. In the eyes of the hunters, life was so humble and weak. This is a hunter from the consortium. Dean noticed the metal on the chest of the youth. His heart was a little relieved. If it was a hunter from other consortiums, it would be better not to expose them. Otherwise, they would be killed. While Dean and others were observing each other, the hunter noticed the traces of burning rings on the ground not far away. He was startled for a moment. He didn't expect that there would be people here. There was a trace of joy in his eyes. He immediately ran towards the burning rings. He felt the residual heat of the burning rings. It was extremely hot. It could be seen that the fire had just been extinguished. He glanced at the corpses on the ground. There was a bit of doubt in his eyes. He was disappointed, but he suddenly thought of something. His eyes lit up again. He immediately looked at the ground. Soon he found a nearby building. There was a trace of smile on his face. His figure quickly rushed in. "He is aware," Mason quickly said. Zach looked at Dean and said, "Dean, if he knows about us, it shouldn't be a problem. Will he rob us?" Dean sighed at the keen observation of the hunter. He also felt the gap between him and the hunter. He just glanced at them and instantly judged their location. The hunter was obviously an experienced veteran. He looked at Zach and shook his head. He shouldn't want it. After all, there are tens of thousands of corpses on the ground. He should disdain us. Zach and the other two were relieved. Chapter 59. You guys must be freshly graduated scavengers, right? The black-armored youth quickly glanced at the room and saw some charred heads on the ground. When he saw the cracked appearance of the head, he couldn't help but look at Dudeen and the other three. Is it the first time for you to scavenge? Or have you been here a few times? You can kill these undeads that have reached level 4 and also know how to collect the cold crystals from their brains. Oh, interesting. Dudeen felt his scalp tighten as he was stared at by the youth's eyes. It was as if he had become prey and would die at any time. He whispered, "We are the new scavengers that joined the consortium. You are the hunter. We were separated from a main team and were chased by these undeads. We inadvertently thought of this method. I didn't expect that we'd be able to deal with these monsters." The black-armored youth glanced at him. It was easy to see that this boy was the core of the group. He smiled and said, "Don't be nervous. I'm very happy that the consortium was able to recruit smart and quick-witted fellows like you. I'm a bit injured and need to be bandaged. You guys light a fire for me and make some space." Dudian looked at the youth's right arm and nodded. He said to Zach, "You light the fire. I'll find some clean cloth for the hunter to bandage." It was the first time for Mason, Zach, and Sand to see the hunter at such a close distance. They were excited and couldn't wait. They immediately got busy. It seemed that it was an honor to serve the hunter. The black-armored youth saw that he was about to enter the next room and said, "There's no need. These things are full of radiation and germs. How can I bandage them? I have first aid supplies in my bag. Little guy, you're pretty smart. Go and keep watch for me. Tell me immediately if there's any movement." He went into the living room and sat down. He didn't care about the horrible burnt skulls around him. He swept the skulls with his thighs to make space. He threw the black backpack on his back and said to Mason, "Open the bag and find the gauze inside." Mason nodded and was about to grab the backpack. When the black-armored youth saw the dirt on his gloves, he couldn't help but frown. "Bastard, take off your gloves. Do you want to dirty my bag?" Mason was shocked. His face suddenly turned red. He hurriedly took off his gloves and opened his backpack. He took out gauze and asked, "Mr. Hunter, do you have disinfectant here? I need to disinfect first before bandaging." "Do I need you to teach me that?" The black-armored youth snorted coldly and said, "There's a knife and a bottle inside. Did you see that? The bottle is filled with alcohol. You scavengers should have learned first aid knowledge, right?" Macon quickly nodded and immediately poured the alcohol from the bottle onto the knife. He put on Zach's torch and made it hot. Macon said, "Mr. Hunter, you should loosen the wound first. Let me use the alcohol to disinfect the wound. I'll do it myself." The black-armored youth grabbed the bottle and flicked his finger. The bottle cap flew out. He loosened his arm and sprinkled the alcohol on the wound. His face twitched in pain, but he still clenched his teeth and endured. Dean and Macon immediately saw the wound. It was a sharp claw mark, deep enough to see the bone. The skin of the wound had ulcerated. The black-armored youth tightly held the wound, not to endure the pain, but to prevent the blood from spreading. The black-armored young man grabbed the red-hot knife, clenched his teeth, and cut away at the wound. Soon, he dug out the festering flesh from the wound. The sharp pain had already caused his head to be covered in hot sweat, as if he had just been drenched in rain. However, during the entire process, he didn't make a sound and just clenched his teeth tightly. This made Dean extremely shocked. Is this the quality of a hunter? Even the soldiers who often go to the battlefield may not have such strong willpower? At this time, after removing the bad flesh, the black-armored youth asked Macon to help him bandage. It didn't take long for his right arm to be bandaged with layers of gauze. The black-armored youth wiped the sweat from his forehead, lightly exhaled, and leaned against the wall, slightly panting. Dean looked at him and calmly said, "Mr. Hunter, the 8th area has been cleaned. How come there are so many undeads? Did they migrate from other nearby areas?" "Don't bother me." The black-armored youth gently closed his eyes and said in a displeased tone. Dean was startled and immediately stopped talking. A few minutes later, the black-armored youth said, "You have food. Give it to me." Macon, who was next to him, hesitated. "Mr. Hunter, this is our food. If you eat it, we..." The black-armored youth suddenly opened his eyes, as if there was a flash of cold lightning. "What? You don't want to?" Macon was shocked and quickly said, No, but here's my food. There's not much left. Mr. Hunter, I will give it to you." Macon is not sensible. Please don't blame him. Sham, who was next to him, quickly said. At the same time, he handed over his backpack, shook it open, and handed the dry food inside to the black-armored youth. Mason and Zach's face slightly changed, although they respected the hunters, but it was different when it came to their own losses. They couldn't help but look at Dean. Dean nodded slightly as if he was acquiescing to their decision. Both of them could not help but secretly feel pain in their heart. The black-armored youth patted Sham's head and said, "Little guy, you are sensible." He grabbed the dry food and ate it. After eating, he stretched out his hand. "Water." Sham quickly handed it to him. The youth drank and threw the empty water bag to the side. He continued to sit and rest for a while. Then he slowly got up and gently moved his right arm for a while. It seemed that this simple bandage had stabilized his injury. He was very satisfied with a smile. Then he looked down at Dudian and the others. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly pointed to Mason. "Little guy, you come with me." Macon was surprised. "Go where?" "You will know." The black-armored youth laughed. Macon hesitated. "Are we going back? But I have a task." "Follow me." "Why so much nonsense?" The black-armored youth frowned and impatiently said. Macon was startled. He realized that something was wrong and couldn't help but look at Dean. Dean also felt a trace of unusualness. "Mr. Hunter, we respect you very much, but we have our own task. If we can't complete it, then we will be expelled by the consortium. I hope you can understand. If you need any help from us, as long as you tell us, we will be happy to help as long as it is within our ability." You're quite good with your words. I need your help right now. Seeing that you guys have a good relationship, I'll let the four of you come together. The more the better." The black-armored youth impatiently waved his hand. His last sentence seemed to be muttering to himself. Dean's face slightly changed. "Can you tell us what it is?" What he said before was just polite words. They were just scavengers. How could they help the hunters? Moreover, if the hunters needed their help, it would certainly not be a common thing. After all, the hunters' mission was to hunt monsters. The black-armored youth's eyes narrowed. There was a trace of hostility in his eyes. But he seemed to think of something. The hostility in his eyes quickly converged. There was a smile on his face as he said, "It's nothing important. I found some precious materials, but I can't carry too much by myself. The four of you come with me and help me carry them back to the giant wall. Don't worry, I will talk to the higher-ups, and you'll get half of the materials." Mason, Sham, and Zach were startled when they heard this. Mason couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. "Elder, is this true? You won't lie to us, right?" Zach was equally excited. Only Sham was slightly puzzled. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't think of the reason. He could only look back at Dean. Chapter 60. Dean and the others followed the youth and left the residential building. They came to the outside of the community and went to the place where Scott and others were previously separated. It didn't take long for two undeads to appear on the street in front of them. They seemed to feel the heat of Dean and others. They immediately turned around and walked towards them. Their pace was obviously accelerating. Dean held the dagger and stared at the back of the hunter. If the hunter abandoned them and escaped, he would immediately turn around and run away with Mason and others. After all, they had no way to resist these undeads in a head-on battle. However, the youth just slightly frowned when he saw the two undeads. The next moment, he took out a sharp dagger from the strap on his leg and took the lead to run. The moment he approached the two undeads, he suddenly twisted his feet. His body crisscrossed like a black whirlwind. The heads of the two undeads were cut off from their necks and fell to the ground. Instant kill. Dean and others' pupils shrank and their faces were aghast. Although they knew that the hunter's duty was to hunt these monsters, but they didn't expect that the hunter would be so strong. This was simply a one-sided slaughter. The youth shook the blood on the dagger and inserted it into the strap on his leg. He looked back at the dazed Dean and others. He faintly smiled and waved his hand, motioning them to keep up. Dudian and the other three quickly followed him. Dean noticed that the dagger on his trouser leg was extremely sharp. Their dagger was not on the same level as the dagger. It was estimated that the dagger was made of excellent steel. On the other hand, his dagger had rolled back after continuously cutting the necks of the corpses. Only the part near the hilt was still sharp, and the front part had long been rolled into a ruler's length. The things in their heads. Dean was about to bend down to collect them. The youth noticed and lightly shouted, "Don't waste time. Hurry up." Dean slightly frowned, but still gave up to continue to collect. He remembered the location in his heart and waited for the opportunity to come back to collect. After all, this thing may be common to the hunters, but for them, it was a big fortune. Along the way, they encountered more and more scattered undeads. But along the way, the black-armored youth did not hurt Dean and others. Every time they encountered an undead, he would take the initiative to attack, relying on his dagger to easily kill them. His speed was far faster than the undead's, and it was obvious that he had received close combat training. His fighting skills were extremely skilled, so the undeads could not even touch him. Dean followed behind, silently observing and learning. He knew that in this era of cold weapons, people had developed fighting techniques to an extremely profound level. Just the killing fighting techniques displayed by this black-armored youth made Dean gasp in amazement. Killing people like cutting grass, his movements were crisp and neat. Even if his arm was injured, there was not the slightest bit of sloppiness. Is this the warrior cultivated on the edge of life and death? Mr. Hunter, will you save Scott and others? They have a lot of people and should not be far from here. Mason asked boldly. Along the way, the black-armored youth protected them. They felt that the black-armored youth's nature was not bad. They gradually had a good impression of him. As for eating Sham's food and water, it had been automatically ignored. The youth snorted and said, "What do you think I am? A medical staff." Mason was stunned. At this moment, the youth's face changed. He looked back at the street. Dean noticed that the place he was looking at was the first place they escaped from. It was also the street where the undeads first appeared. Dean seemed to feel the ground under his feet gently trembling. It seemed that there were tall buildings collapsing in the distance. There was a soft roar. The youth's eyes narrowed. There was a trace of bloodthirst in his eyes. He looked up and glanced at the surrounding buildings. Soon, his eyes locked on the top of the tallest office building in the vicinity. The building had long been covered with moss and vegetation. The windows were rusty and dilapidated. He glanced at it and smiled. He bowed to Dean and the others. "You wait here. You can't leave without my order." Dean's face changed. "What about you? I have something to do. I'll be back soon." The youth's eyes were serious. "Remember, you can't leave without my order. If anyone leaves without permission, don't blame me for being ruthless." At this point, he glanced coldly at the four of them and said, "You'd better remember what I said. Otherwise, I'll skin you alive, even if you return to the consortium." He looked back at his previous position, sneered, and quickly left. He rushed to the front of the office building like a black cat and disappeared from the sight of Dudian and the other three. This. Macon was stunned. Where did he go? Dean looked at the disappearing back. There was an unknown feeling in his heart. Suddenly, he thought of the bow and arrows on the back of the youth. Tall buildings, bows, and arrows. His pupils suddenly shrank. The archer was lying in ambush from a high vantage point. Could it be that they were being used as bait by the black-armored youth? Run! Thinking of this possibility, Dudian suddenly roared and quickly ran toward the office building. While the youth in black armor had not climbed to the top of the building, he must escape from this area as soon as possible. Otherwise, if they made a slight movement, they might be shot on the spot. He had seen the means of the youth to kill the undeads. He didn't have the confidence to protect himself from being shot by a hunter who was good at archery. Mason, Zach, and Shaw were stunned and puzzled. But because of their trust, they subconsciously followed behind Dean. Mason hurriedly said, "Dean, what happened? Why are we running?" If he knows, Dean had seen the black-armored youth kill the undeads along the way and protect them. He had a good impression of him, but now it was gone. He said in a cold voice, "We are likely to be used by him. He is using us as bait to lure his prey into the trap." Bait? Mason, Zach, and Shaw were stunned. But soon they thought of the probability of this possibility. They suddenly shuddered. Dean had run to the office building. He gently gasped for breath. He looked back and saw the three people following him. He was relieved. "Go around to the other side. Don't let him find us." Zach's face was ugly. "If we meet him later, he won't let us off easily. Even if we hide from him and return to the giant wall, he won't give us a good fruit to eat." Dean's eyes were cold. He coldly said, "Then kill him." Mason and the other two couldn't help but be startled. They looked at him with astonishment. Mason couldn't help but say, "Kill him? My God, do you know what you're saying? He is a hunter. How can we kill him? No, how can we kill him? Even if we can kill him, it is a big crime." "Dean, are you sure?" Sham's face was slightly pale. "If your speculation is wrong, then he just let us stand there. He has some personal matters to deal with. Then we will—" Dean was startled. This possibility was indeed there, but how could he gamble? There was only one life. If his speculation was right, then staying there was the same as waiting for death. It was obvious that the hunter who could easily kill the undeads needed bait to kill them. It was absolutely terrifying. They were doomed to be unable to escape once they saw it. Although there were many other possibilities, but this was the biggest one he could think of. If it was wrong, then it was wrong to the end. Dean thought of the desert assessment 3 years ago. The 3-star alchemist, Rosyard, had died in his hands. His heart was hesitant and indecisive. This was a choice. Perhaps it was just one of the possibilities he speculated. Even if this possibility was wrong, he still had to make a choice. That was to kill. We have left that place. Whether the speculation is right or wrong, we must kill him. Otherwise, we will be suppressed by him in the future, or even die in his hands. Dean's eyes were cold as he resolutely said. Mason and the other two looked at his eyes. They took a deep breath and hesitated. After all, if they participated in the action of killing the hunter, then they were murderers. For any good people, the word murderer was too heavy. Dean also looked at them, waiting for their choice. There was a little fear in his heart. If they didn't choose not to participate, then what would he do if they knew about his action? He didn't dare to think about it. In the short time he had been here, he felt that the evil door that was sealed in his heart was slightly opened. A lot of evil thoughts were released, but some things were his bottom line that he didn't want to cross. Roar! At this moment, a low roar suddenly sounded from the corner where the few people were previously standing. Chapter 61. The top of the dilapidated high-rise building had been baptized by the radiation rain for hundreds of years. 2 or 3 floors had already collapsed. Byrne jumped from the wreckage of the broken wall and climbed to the gap at the top of the broken wall. It was a commanding height, and with the cover of the broken wall, it was also very suitable for an ambush. This made him very satisfied, and he felt that this ambush would be very smooth. When he crouched down and approached, he suddenly heard a roar coming from the front of the high-rise building. He was shocked. Did that thing arrive so soon? He quickly adjusted the grip of the bow and quickly took out 2 sharp arrows from the quiver. The arrows were silver, and the cold light flashed in his eyes. He looked down from the crack in the wall and suddenly saw his prey. He saw that in front of him, there were 2 semi-broken buildings covered with vegetation. A black crawling monster jumped out from the corner. It was about 5 meters long. Its whole body was covered with black hair that stuck to its body. Its head was like a wolf. Its mouth was protruding, and its fangs were long and sharp. Smelly saliva constantly flowed down from the gap between the fangs and stained the hair on its chin. Finally came out Defiler. Byrne's eyes narrowed, and a trace of bloodthirsty excitement flashed in his eyes. Rare monster that has reached level 9. As long as I kill you, my magic mark can evolve again and master new abilities. He quickly knocked an arrow on his bow and swept his gaze over. However, he didn't see the figures of the 4 little guys on the empty street in front of the Chudai. His expression couldn't help but change, and his gaze became incomparably cold. Beast! Damn little bastard! If I didn't want you to struggle a little in front of it and create more time for me to attack, I would have killed you all on the spot. Looking at the Defiler that was shaking its head left and right on the street, as if it was looking for the smell, Byrne's face turned pale. This thing was not a brainless low-level undead. If he rashly attacked, he would definitely be detected by it and alert the enemy. He clenched his teeth and suddenly thought of something. These little bastards said that they are separated from a main force. If I lead it to the main force, I should have a chance to kill it. Thinking of this, hope rose in his eyes again. He quickly opened his backpack and took out a yellow bottle. He opened the bottle cap and sprinkled the yellow powder on his black armor. I have this powder to cover my smell. As long as I don't get too close, it won't be able to find me. I will wait until it eats those little bastards. Then I will leave immediately. Burns secretly made up his mind. Dudeen and the other three were scared when they saw the black behemoth jump out from the corner of the street. They had only heard of such a horrible monster in stories. Who would have thought that it would really exist in reality? Dean reacted and hurriedly said, "Run, go to the stairs." Mason, Zach, and Sham reacted and followed Dudeen into the building. "Quick, hide!" Sham stuttered and almost cried. The ferocious Walking Dead was scary enough, but compared with this black behemoth, the former was simply a cute little thing. Dean was also pale as he heard Sham's words. "We can't hide. We have to go to the roof to find him." Macon trembled. He won't save us. We disobeyed his words. We are not asking for help. We're going to kill him, or we will lead that thing to him. Even if we die, we will pull him down with us." Dean clenched his fists. His heart was full of fear and strong anger. His guess was right. The bastard was really using them as bait. They had helped him to bandage and deal with his wounds. Not only he didn't know how to be grateful, but he even bit them. Moreover, the bite was too deep and too painful. It was a death sentence. Bastard. Dean had never been so angry in his heart. He quickly went up the stairs. At the same time, his mind was thinking very fast. On the top of the high-rise building, Byrne was observing the bastard through the cracks in the wall. He saw that the bastard was looking at the direction of the high-rise building. Apparently, it had found the smell of the 4 little bastards. Brian's eyes flashed a trace of cold light. He secretly said, "Damn little bastard. Why don't you obediently wait for death? Why do you have to run? Do you think that by escaping to the building you can save yourself? You will be bitten to death by it. Worthless garbage. Bastard. Bastard." He knew that Dean and the other 3 were dead. Without the walking dead bone powder to cover the smell, they would be found by the bastard. However, he was not happy. Instead, he gritted his teeth angrily. Dying in the building was of no value to him. In the building, he couldn't find an angle to attack. The previous open street was his perfect hunting ground. But in the building, for a hunter who specialized in long-range archery, it was the worst terrain. At this time, he saw that the bastard had entered the building. He immediately calculated the time in his mind. With the speed of the little bastards, if they left the street from the moment he entered the building, then they should be on the 4th to 6th floor. With the speed of the bastard, it would catch up with them when they reached the 10th floor. And he was on the 23rd floor. When he climbed to the top, he had already noted down the floor of the building. As a veteran hunter, his observation and coping ability were beyond the imagination of ordinary people. If the battle broke out on the 10th floor, I don't know if the bastard would be able to smell the distance between me and the 10th floor. Brian frowned. There was some uneasiness in his heart. After all, he had only seen the simple information of the bastard in the hunting manual. It was described as extremely sensitive to smell, but he didn't know how sensitive it was. After thinking about it, he took out the bottle of walking dead bone powder and poured it all on the black armor. He evenly smeared it on all parts of the body. At the same time, his mind was thinking and calculating quickly. Now, they should be on the 8th floor. The bastard should be chasing them to the 6th floor. I estimate that they will be eaten soon. If the bastard feels me after eating them, then I can only jump from here. He began to think about the plan of retreat. After all, he couldn't pin all his hopes on the walking dead bone powder. Time passed little by little. Burns' muscles tightened and his lips moved slightly. He was calculating the time and simulating the following process in his mind. These little brats should be dead. Let's see if it will leave the building or chase after us. He held his breath and waited. It was as if time was frozen in his mind. Suddenly, a roar came from the building under his feet. A giant black shadow jumped out and opened its mouth to bite Brian. Chapter 62. Whoosh! Byrne fell straight down the side of the building. At the same time, he saw the fearful infected standing in his previous position. Its front claws overturned the corroded wall. Stones rolled down, but the fearful infected didn't jump down. It growled a few times and turned its head. Its body disappeared from the side of the wall. Most likely it was ready to go downstairs to collect Burn's body. He breathed a sigh of relief and quickly grabbed the bow on his back. He took out an arrow that was inserted into the notch of the quiver. This arrow was twice as thick as the other arrows, and the end of the arrow was tied with a very thin rope. He turned his head and aimed at another 4-story building on the side. He pulled the bow to its fullest, and the arrow flew through the air. Whoosh! The arrow fell on a solar water heater on the top of the building. The force was so strong that it penetrated the moss-covered solar water heater. The arrow was stuck on the floor under the support. The rope was more than 10 meters long. As his body fell, it immediately tightened. The rope broke at the edge of the building, and the heavy force created a deep trench in the corner of the corroded concrete. Holding the rope, Burn was like a swing as he smashed into the window of the second floor. The glass was instantly shattered. Burn cut the rope with a dagger the moment he smashed into the window. After 2 continuous rolls, he quickly climbed up and ran forward without looking back. It didn't take long for the fearful infected to rush out from the previous building. Burn had long disappeared. It raised its nose and gently sniffed. It looked left and right for a moment. Finally, it locked the direction and chased after Burn. About 4 or 5 minutes after the fearful infected left, 4 figures quietly came out from a pillar under the building. Their bodies were dripping with blood and dirty. It was Dudian and the other 3. It should have gone far. Sham whispered. Dudian looked at the direction where the fearful infected left. His eyes slightly flashed as he whispered, "Let's catch up and see. We must find the hunter." Mason, Zach, and Sham were surprised. Mason whispered, "Are you crazy? You still want to chase it? It can find the bastard on the roof, which shows that its sense of smell is extremely terrible. If we are not careful and it smells our body, then we are finished. With this layer of blood covering it, I won't be able to smell it for now." Dean glanced at the smelly blood on his body and said, the blood was from the undead in the corridor. When he climbed to the second floor, he happened to see the undead in the corridor. He suddenly thought of this idea. That was to smear the blood of the undead on their bodies to cover up the smell and pretend to be undead. The dark blue balls in the heads of these zombies were taken out, and their body temperature returned to normal. They began to rot, and the smell of blood mixed with rotten flesh was very strong. Dean noticed that the monster ignored the corpses on the roadside, so he took the risk to try it. In order to disguise himself thoroughly, he let Mason and the other 2 hold an undead and smear their rotten blood all over his black armor, including his face. However, considering the toxicity of the blood, Dean didn't directly smear it on his face, but held on the cloth and then covered his face with the cloth. Although some of the blood would penetrate into his face, but it was the most important thing to save his life. Moreover, in order to divert the attention of the monster and reduce the weight, the 4 of them threw all their backpacks on the first floor. The backpacks were stained with their sweat, so it was too dangerous to put them on the side. It was a desperate last attempt, but they didn't expect to succeed. The few of them had escaped from death. They didn't celebrate, but the 3 of them heard Dean's bold words. They shook their heads again and again. "We were lucky before, but if we catch up and something happens, then we will die." Shem also advised. Dean looked at the 3 of them and said, "If you don't want to, then wait for me here or go to the main force. The hunter must be killed, or we won't be at peace when we go back." This monster confirmed his guess, and also made Dean more deeply understand the cruelty of hunters. He didn't think that such a cold-blooded and cruel person would easily let go of people who disrupted his plan. If they fell into the hands of the other, it was estimated that death would be a light punishment, and maybe they would be tortured to death. Instead of pinning their hopes on the mercy of the hunter, it was better to cut off the hidden dangers himself. Mason and the other 2 were surprised. Seeing Dean was ready to catch up, Mason said, "I'll go with you. The 4 of us will live and die together. If we die, then we die together." His thick eyebrows and big eyes showed a resolute look. Dean deeply looked at him and nodded slightly. At this time, Zach and Sham heard Mason's words and also stood up and were willing to follow Dean. Although they had been together for 3 years and helped each other many times, but they were willing to follow him in such a dangerous moment. Dean's heart was full of warmth. He nodded and said, "Let's go." He took the lead to go out of the door and was ready to chase the direction of the monster. Suddenly, "You little bastards, you're still alive?" A cold and sinister voice sounded above their heads. Dean's pupils shrank as he looked up. He saw the figure of the hunter appeared in the broken window on the second floor. He didn't leave. Byrne was more surprised than Dean. He didn't expect that they could escape the perception of the fear-stained. However, when he saw the bloody slurry on the bodies of the four of them, he suddenly understood. He couldn't help but coldly said, "Little bastards, you have a lot of ideas. Since I bumped into you, it means that God wants to take your little life. Die for me." He lifted the bow and arrows and instantly pulled the bow. Dean's face changed. He quickly turned over and drilled into the building. Whoosh, whoosh. 2 arrows were shot at the position where he had been standing. "Run! Separate and run!" Dean shouted as he drilled into the building. Mason and the other 2 were scared. They were going to chase the other party, but the other party unexpectedly appeared in front of them. Hearing Dudian's words, the 3 of them woke up from a dream and rushed to the second floor. Dean saw them running in the same direction, hurriedly said, "Run separately, or he will catch up with us. He is only chasing me." From the previous 2 arrows were shot at him. He knew that the hunter hated him the most. Mason and the other 2 said, "There is hope if we go together. Let's fight him." "Listen to me," Dean roared. The 3 of them couldn't help but be startled. They gritted their teeth and ran in 3 different directions. Dean looked back at the hunter who jumped down from the second floor. His face was ugly. He quickly turned over and ran. He knew that if he was caught by the hunter, he would die. The undeads were powerless in front of the hunter, let alone the scavengers. "Cunning little bastard, it's all your fault for ruining my plan." Byrne had long seen that the 4 of them listened to the arrangement of the kid in front of him. If it was other scavengers, even if they were adults, they would stand where he told them to stand. They wouldn't dare to move. The thought that the other party was the culprit who destroyed his plan to hunt the defiler made him clench his fists subconsciously. It seemed that he would crush the air as if it was Dean's head. "Run! I will peel your skin." Byrne's face was full of anger. He quickly chased along the stairs. He had already left the place, but considering that the smell of the 4 dead scavengers would linger here for some time, he took a detour and returned. He didn't expect that the 4 scavengers would be alive and well. He was surprised and at the same time ignited a strong desire to kill them. He wanted to make them suffer so much that they would rather die. Whoosh! Soon, he caught up to the second floor. He heard footsteps not far above his head. They should be on the 4th floor. He sneered and quickly chased. Chapter 63. Byrne's eyebrows twitched. He quietly approached and slowly pushed open the office, which was covered with vegetation. The door was not locked, so it made a slight squeaking sound. Byrne looked sideways and saw that his arrow was nailed to a wooden table in the room. He slightly frowned. At this moment, he suddenly heard a subtle movement coming from the opposite office behind him. His eyes flashed, and he suddenly turned back and shot the arrow. The speed of the arrow was completed in 0.2 seconds. The arrow instantly flew through the air and shot through the window of the office. Suddenly, there was a suppressed, low groan of pain. "Little bastard," Byrne slightly sneered. He put away the bow and pulled out the dagger on his leg. He walked step by step toward the office and kicked open the half-closed door. Bang! The door suddenly fell down. The dim light in the room was all presented in his line of sight. He immediately saw Dean lying on his stomach on one of the desks. The arrow seemed to have penetrated the other side of his ribs and nailed him to the table. Byrne's eyes revealed a bloodthirsty color. He was very confident in his bow and arrow. Even hard stones could be penetrated, not to mention the weak, soft armor of a scavenger. "Little bastard, struggle. Are you desperate?" Byrne licked his lips and approached step by step. Dean was sweating and looked at him in horror. Don't come over." "Scream, continue to scream." Byrne's eyes flashed coldness. "Destroy my good things, boy, worthless little bastard. I will skin you and remove your bones." As Byrne approached, the fear on Dean's face became more and more intense. However, when Byrne was 4 or 5 meters away from Dean's desk, the fear on Dean's face disappeared. It was as if he had changed his face, revealing a fierce and resolute killing intent. His body suddenly straightened up, and the arm that had been hidden under his chest suddenly threw out a shadow. It was his dagger. Such a sudden attack made Byrne stunned for a moment. But he was a hunter after all. He had fought on the edge of life and death. So he instinctively raised his dagger and parried the dagger that was shooting straight towards him. Ding! Ding! At this time, Byrne saw that his bow and arrow did not hit Dean, but was nailed to the wooden table. Previously, Dean deliberately clamped the arrow under his armpit, creating a dislocation effect, which made him mistakenly think that he had shot Dean. Little bastard. Byrne was completely angry. He was enraged by Dean's attack, but he was also angry that he fell into a scavenger's trap. He ferociously said, "I will twist your head, squeeze your eyeballs, damn little bastard." His body rushed out as fast as the leopard. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance of 4 or 5 meters. However, Dean did not panic. When he threw the dagger, he also picked up the keyboard, the LCD screen, the glass, the picture frame, and the withered flower pot on the table, and threw them at Byrne. Although these things would not cause any harm, but they could stop the opponent. Byrne knew Du Dian's intention. He was humiliated by Du Dian's previous scheme. So how could he let Du Dian do as he pleased? He raised his hand and knocked the things that were thrown at his face. As for the other cups and flower pots, he didn't even look at them. He let them hit his body. With the hardness of his soft armor, even if he was hit by a stone, it wouldn't cause any damage. While ignoring these things, he quickly caught up to Du Dian. At this time, Dean threw a mass of cloth in vain. This cloth was on the table, but now was thrown along with other things. It seemed that he had grabbed it in a hurry. The moment he threw it, Dean could not help but look back. Bam! Byrne kicked the ball of cloth and sneered, "Little devil, do you think I will suffer twice? Everything else is covered with dust and moss seeds, but your cloth has traces of being turned over. Is there something hidden inside?" Byrne's eyes lit up as he sneered, "Little devil, do you think I will suffer twice?" Dean's pupils shrank. He had underestimated the horror of hunters. Their strong physique was only one of their means. What was really terrible was their rich combat experience. Perhaps they had already exhausted many of the traps they had set when hunting monsters. "I underestimated you." Dean slightly gasped and stared at him coldly. Byrne sneered, "You can't kill a hunter with your tricks. Since you let the other 3 little bastards escape, you will replace them to bear my anger." Dean also sneered, "You also underestimated me, idiot." Then he suddenly squatted down. Byrne was startled. He caught a glimpse of a metal machine under the table next to him. There seemed to be a faint flame coming out. The next moment, the flame expanded and swallowed him. Boom! There was a loud noise as if the whole room was shaking. The lights on the ceiling were shaken and fell down. Although Dean had dodged in time and was behind a desk, but at the moment of the explosion, he felt like his whole body was flying. Then he fiercely hit a bumpy hard object. The hard object was quickly broken. He fell deeply to the ground. The pain spread from his arms, ribs, abdomen, and other parts of his body. He clenched his teeth. He felt his ears were buzzing, and his head was bursting with dizziness. He tried his best to open his eyes. In his line of sight, under the turbid light, there were layers of double images in the office, and they kept spinning and shaking. He gritted his teeth, raised his hand, and slapped his face. After 2 or 3 continuous slaps, he felt that his vision gradually recovered. He quickly struggled to sit up and looked up at the place where the explosion had happened. It was the place where he had been lying. The previous movement was not simply to lure the hunter in, but to hide the ignited explosives in the computer under the desk. Using the fire sickle to ignite the cloth burned the coarse paper on the outside of the black gunpowder tube. The pulp of the coarse paper was simply filtered. There were too many sawdust and sundries, so the speed at which it burned was extremely slow. The accumulated dust on the cloth was too thick. Even though it was cut into strips by the dagger, it still burned very slowly. He deliberately lay there. In addition to pretending that he had been hit by an arrow, his real purpose was to cover the gunpowder underneath. After all, this tube of black gunpowder was extremely large. Although the lethality was great, it was very difficult to blow up a hunter who was extremely vigilant. So he had to take the risk. If the cloth burned faster than he expected, he would be the first to be killed. If the burning process was extinguished, he would be killed by the opponent. This was a dead end in a hopeless situation. He could only go all out and gamble. Dean felt tired. He leaned against the wall and gasped for breath. At the same time, he grabbed the cloth bundle that was kicked to the wall. He untied the knot. Inside the bundle were dozens of dark blue balls. There was a trace of a smile on his face. But the next moment, his body suddenly froze. He saw that in front of the explosion, the hunter's body was struggling and slowly stood up. His whole body was bleeding. His right arm was close to the side of the bomb, but he still stood up tenaciously. His hand was tightly holding the dagger. He looked at Dean with a crazy face. Chapter 64. Dean was horrified and quickly struggled to get up, but he felt weak in his hands and feet. He was too close to the explosion, so he was affected by it. His bones were sore, and he couldn't exert any strength. Little bastard. Brian's face was covered with blood as he stared at Dean. He dragged his injured right leg and slowly walked towards Dean. He lifted the dagger and stabbed Dean's chest. Dean hurriedly rolled sideways and narrowly avoided the blow. Burns' right arm was broken and his right leg was seriously injured. His body was out of balance and fell to the place where Dean was sitting. He struggled to get up again, but he couldn't support his body with one hand. Finally, he fell to the ground. His bloody face revealed a strong, crazy hatred. He held the dagger and crawled towards Dean. Dean was relieved to see that Byrne didn't have the strength to stand up again. It seemed that although the explosion didn't kill him, but he was seriously injured. He quickly grabbed the things at hand, such as the fallen flower pots, water bottles, and wheelchairs, and threw them at Byrne's head. Byrne's head wasn't protected by the black armor. If it was an ordinary time, he would feel a little pain. But at this moment, the right side of his face was injured. When the flower pots and chairs fell on his body, the muscles of his body twitched. Byrne roared and waved the dagger, but he couldn't reach Dean's feet. He roared and waved the dagger, but he couldn't reach Dean's feet. Dean didn't dare to get too close. He was worried that Byrne would suddenly pounce on him. Suddenly, he remembered that he threw the dagger. Although the blade was twisted, but the tip was still sharp. He immediately ran to the place where Byrne was. He found the dagger and looked back. Byrne had already crawled over. Dean was about to assassinate Byrne, but he saw Byrne's ferocious eyes. Byrne's eyes were filled with a threatening chill. He was like a beast that could counterattack at any time. Dean hesitated. The floor of the room trembled. Bang! The place under Byrne's body, which was the location of the previous explosion, suddenly sank down. The ground within a few meters of the explosion collapsed. The floor and Byrne fell to the third floor. There was an office on the third floor, and several desks were crushed. Byrne, who was lying on the floor, was in pain. He gritted his teeth and crawled up. At this moment, the ground under his body shook again and then collapsed again. He fell to the second floor. Byrne, who had just crawled up, heavily hit the floor and stopped moving. Dean couldn't help but be startled. He came to the edge of the collapse and looked down. The hunter was completely motionless. Blood slowly flowed out from his right arm and stained the floor under his body. Dean breathed a sigh of relief. He felt as if his whole body had collapsed. He immediately retreated a few steps and came to the corridor. He sat down and leaned against the wall to rest. This building was really made of tofu dregs. After 300 years of corrosion, the level of explosion had shaken the floors of the lower two floors. It was estimated that if the firepower was bigger, the whole building would be blown up. After resting for a while, Dean felt that his physical strength had recovered a little. He went back to the office, grabbed the dark blue ball, and left. When he returned to the second floor, Dean suddenly thought that if other scavengers found this place, they would most likely report it to the consortium and lead to the investigation of other hunters. His eyes were cold. He picked up his dagger and went to the office. He saw the hunter was still lying on the floor. The blood flowing out of his body was almost dry. He took out his scythe and rummaged through the office. He soon found a lot of scattered white papers. He immediately threw these papers on the hunter. Just as he squatted down and threw the papers on the hunter's back, an accident suddenly happened. The hunter, who should have been dead, suddenly turned over and stabbed the dagger in his hand toward Dean's chest. All of this was completely beyond Dean's expectation. He could not help but be stunned. He only felt that the dagger easily pierced his soft armor and stabbed into his chest. The first feeling was cold, and then he felt severe pain from his chest. He widened his eyes and looked at the hunter incredulously. The hunter was pretending to be dead, just to fight back when he approached. He had rested for a while, but during this time, the hunter was able to resist pretending to be dead. It was as if he had expected that Dean would inevitably come close. What kind of faith and endurance was this? Beast! Burns slowly raised his head. His face was pale due to excessive blood loss, but his eyes revealed an incomparably crazy hatred. He gently smiled as if he was mocking himself. His hand that was holding the dagger loosened and fell down powerlessly. This time he was really dead, but the dagger was inserted in Dean's chest. Dean covered the area around the dagger. The pain almost made his whole body tremble, and he could not stand steadily. His body fell down, and he looked down at his chest with difficulty. He felt that every movement of his body affected the muscles in his chest, and there was a tearing pain. I can't die, I can't die. Dean kept repeating this thought in his mind. His consciousness gradually blurred, and his limbs seemed to be a little cold. He wanted to fall asleep, but his sister and parents' voices and smiles slowly emerged in his mind. He also seemed to hear his mother and sister's last words before the freezer was closed. You have to live well. You have to live well. Live well. He fiercely bit the tip of his tongue. His previously drowsy consciousness suddenly recovered a bit. He looked down and found that the dagger did not pierce into the heart. If it was pierced, he would die on the spot. Perhaps the hunter had lost too much blood, and his arm was weak, so he lost his aim. Seeing this, Dean's heart suddenly surged with a strong desire to survive. He gritted his teeth and pulled out the dark blue ball from his backpack. He stuck it on his chest through layers of cloth. While it absorbed heat, it could also stop the bleeding and pain. Dean slowly climbed up and came to the other side of the hunter. He opened the first aid bag hanging on his waist and pulled out an unused roll of white gauze, as well as some bottles and jars. Some were pills, some were powder. Dean found the alcohol in it. He trembled and ignited the flame with the fire sickle. He piled the prepared paper on the hunter's body. At the same time, he took off the soft armor on his upper body and exposed his body. Although the radiation in the air was high, it was not a big deal for a while. He held the alcohol in his mouth and spat it on the wound on his chest. Then, he gritted his teeth and slowly pulled out the dagger. The pain made him feel like his scalp was about to explode and his soul was trembling. He wanted to stop several times, but he still endured the pain and slowly pulled out the dagger. Blood suddenly gushed out, and bursts of exhaustion almost made him faint. He tightly wrapped the gauze around his chest. At this moment, he couldn't find a needle and thread, so it was impossible to suture the wound. The most important thing was to temporarily stop the bleeding. Soon, the white gauze in front of the wound was dyed red. Dean could only roll it layer by layer and tighten his body. Then he put on the soft armor and put the dark blue ball on his chest, hoping that the cold air could stop the bleeding as soon as possible. After doing this, Dean looked at the hunter's body burning in the flame and gradually turning into a charred corpse. A chill rose in his heart. These hunters were really not small characters. He had to be more careful when he encountered them in the future. He leaned against the wall to rest, and at the same time, he studied the bottles and jars in the first aid bag. What made him bitter was that these medicines were not labeled. He didn't dare to take them. After all, these medicines were for the hunter's physique. The effect was extremely strong. If he used it wrongly, it would only put him in more danger. Time passed slowly. Dean was relieved that the blood on the gauze on his chest had stopped spreading. The bleeding had stopped temporarily, but he couldn't do any strenuous activities. Otherwise, the wound would immediately split open. However, God didn't care for him again. When Dean was quietly looking at the distance from a vegetated window, he heard a soft tremor coming from the ground. At the same time, a low roar came from the distant street outside the window. The voice was very familiar. It was the previous black beast. Dean, who was sitting on the ground to rest, suddenly changed his face. Chapter 65. It actually came back. Was it attracted by the previous explosion? Or did it follow my smell? Dean's heart was pounding, and his whole body was in cold sweat. He had used all his strength to deal with a hunter, but he was almost killed. At this moment, if he encountered this monster in his seriously injured state, he would almost certainly die. Moreover, the monster could directly find the ambush hunter on the roof, which showed that its sense of smell was extremely terrible. At this moment, the bloody smell on his chest couldn't be covered. No matter how much blood he smeared, it was difficult to suppress it. Unless he smeared the blood directly on the wound and let the virus in the blood infect the blood, he could suppress the bloody smell. But in this way, he would be infected and become an undead. There was no way out. There was no way to escape. He would die if he fought head-on, but he would still die if he escaped. Dean was desperate. Did God want me to die? At this time, when he looked up, he saw the collapsed place above. He couldn't help but be startled. His eyes suddenly shot out a strong desire to survive. He climbed up from the ground. The dagger wound on his chest was suddenly affected, and bursts of tearing pain came. He tightly clenched his teeth, dragged his body to the scorched body of the hunter, picked up the dagger that had stabbed him on the ground, and picked up the hunter's bow, an arrow that had fallen to the side. When he grabbed the dark, ancient bow, Dean suddenly felt like he was holding a boulder. It was extremely heavy. He bent down and tried to pull the bowstring. Suddenly, he found that the bowstring was tight. With his strength, he couldn't pull it at all. Dean's face was ugly. The ambush and shooting plan that he had just thought of suddenly collapsed. Once again, he was faced with despair. At this time, he suddenly saw a thick arrow in the quiver. The tail of the arrow was connected to a rope. He was startled for a moment, and suddenly his eyes lit up. He quickly pulled out the arrow and the coil of rope behind it. At this time, he heard the roar outside gradually approaching. The ground trembled, and the loud footsteps quickly approached in a straight line. Apparently, the place had been discovered. Dean's face slightly changed. He hurriedly turned and ran upstairs. As he ran, the wound on his chest suddenly split open. The wound that had just stopped bleeding suddenly oozed a lot of blood, staining the white gauze. Dean was lying on the stairs, feeling dizzy. He knew that it was caused by excessive blood loss. He felt that he would faint at any time. But thinking of the monster chasing behind him, he bit the tip of his tongue and sped up to the top of the building. When Dean ran to the 6th floor, he heard a loud sound of glass breaking. The sound transmission was very clear in the silent ruins. The source of the sound came from the 2nd floor. Dean's heart tightened, and he hurriedly crawled harder. When he came to the 7th floor, Dean felt that he was out of breath. He did not continue to go up. He inserted the dagger into his waist and carried the rope to the window at the edge of the building. He piled up several dusty desks together and wrapped the rope around the desks. Then he came to the window and stabbed the concrete floor with an arrow. The floor, which had long been puffy and rotten, was easily pierced by the sharp arrows. At this time, there was a burst of collapsing sound in the corridor. It was the sound of the stairs collapsing. Dean's face was ugly. He knew that the monster had chased him. But during this time, it seemed to stay on the 2nd floor for a while. Most likely, the hunter's body attracted its attention. Bang! Dean felt that the floor under his feet was slightly trembling. It seemed that the floor of the 6th floor was smashed. Obviously, with the monster's 5-meter-tall body, it could not squeeze up from the stairs, so it chose to smash the floor directly. Dean felt that the ceiling above his head was falling one after another. The tremor caused by the monster was fatal to the already crumbling building. He hurriedly grasped the rope and stared at the front. Bang! Suddenly, on the ground less than 2 meters in front of his feet, a giant black claw suddenly broke out of the ground. The claw was waving and almost stabbed Dean. Dean was shocked. He saw that at the same time the giant claw stabbed out, the floor 5 meters in front of him was smashed. A huge, hideous head with sharp fangs and dark red eyes bigger than a fist was staring at him. It roared and rushed toward him. Dean hurriedly jumped out of the window behind him. His body fell rapidly. Dean tightly grasped the rope, which was his only lifeline. Looking up, he saw that the monster had climbed to the 7th floor. Its huge body was squeezed in the narrow space of the 7th floor. It looked down at him and roared in vain as it jumped toward him. Dean was scared out of his wits. He hurriedly grabbed the platform under the glass window in front of him. However, at this moment, he had fallen to the 3rd floor, which was equivalent to falling 4 floors. Without any unloading force and buffer, his arm directly grabbed the platform. Suddenly, he felt like his body and arm were torn apart. The severe pain and heavy falling force made his fingers unable to hold tightly and immediately slipped down. Dean almost cried in pain. The panic in his heart made him hurriedly reach out again. With the previous buffer from the 3rd floor, this time he hit the window on the 2nd floor and immediately stabilized his body. Dean did not dare to raise his head. He hurriedly smashed the glass with his head and quickly climbed in. Almost at the moment when he climbed in, a strong wind rolled from behind, and at the same time, a cracking sound was heard. Dean hurriedly looked back and was horrified to see that the window he had previously grabbed had a huge gap in the wall. Looking down, he saw that the black monster had smashed on the ground floor. Its body was also pressed by a few half-meter-high stones and fine glass debris. Dean was relieved. Fortunately, the wall was not strong enough to bear its weight. At this time, a hideous low roar came from downstairs again. Dean was shocked to see that the black monster had climbed up again and fell from the 7th floor. Unexpectedly, it did not fall to its death. Dean's face was pale. Half of it was scared, and the other half was caused by excessive blood loss. He wanted to turn around and run, but suddenly remembered that the stairs had collapsed due to the previous tremor. At this moment, he saw that the monster had climbed up and seemed to want to jump in one breath. Time seemed to be pressing for his life. He suddenly grabbed the rope outside and kept climbing up along the rope. While he was climbing, the monster suddenly jumped up. Its sharp claws deeply grasped the wall beside the building, and it roared angrily at Dean above. Dean looked down and immediately saw the open bloody mouth and the long sharp tongue. His heart was cold, and he climbed faster and faster. At the same time, the tearing pain from a wound on his chest was getting heavier and heavier. Blood had already dyed his chest red. Soon, Dean climbed to the 4th floor, and the black behemoth once again jumped up. Dean was so scared that he hurriedly jumped into the window of the 4th floor and rolled in. Ignoring the severe pain in his body, he covered his chest and hurriedly ran to the other side of the 4th floor. At the same time, the giant beast jumped to the outside of the wall of the 4th floor. Its claws were deeply embedded in the wall, but it did not fall down. The rope that Dean had previously climbed was swept by its giant claws and was immediately embedded in the gap of its claws. Looking at the direction where Dean ran, it roared and climbed up to the 4th floor. However, there was a 6 or 7 meters wide hole in the middle of the room. Only the edge of the room could barely be walked. With its size, it could only crawl with its body down. There was no way to catch up. However, its strong desire for blood obviously wouldn't let it give up its prey just like that. It roared and jumped out of the hole, its claws digging deep into the corridor outside the office opposite the hole. The corridor couldn't bear its weight and immediately collapsed, bringing its body down with it. Hearing the huge movement behind him, Dean did not dare to stay. He ran to the other side and continued to climb up. Chapter 66. Dean climbed to the 5th floor and heard the violent movement coming from below. He knew that the giant beast was still chasing him. He took a slight breath and continued to climb up. At this moment, the ground behind him suddenly cracked open. The head and claws of the giant beast stretched out and clung to the edge of the wall. It was the backbone of the building, made of steel and concrete. Even though it had decayed, it was much stronger than the other parts of the building. The giant beast climbed up and chased after Dean. Dean's face changed and hurriedly ran around the floor. The giant beast roared and rushed from behind. The walls were knocked down and the ground cracked. It approached at an amazing speed. Dean's hair stood up. For a moment, he could not feel the pain from his chest. He ran along the corridor to the other side of the building. At this moment, the whole building suddenly shook violently, as if there was an earthquake. The ground under the feet of the giant beast, which was about to catch up, suddenly collapsed. The giant beast, which was only 4 or 5 meters away from Dean, hurriedly grabbed the edge of the collapse. But its claws sank deep into the floor, and more places collapsed together with it, falling to the bottom. At the same time, Dean suddenly felt that the whole world was tilting. He looked at the slanted streets and other buildings outside. His pupils contracted. The building he was in was collapsing. The serious damage from the 2nd floor to the 7th floor, the vibration caused by the giant beast's rampage, and now the destruction of the 5th floor. Finally, the foundation of the building, which had been baptized for 300 years, was broken and collapsed. Once it fell, the shock caused by the fall could be imagined. Dean's face was pale. He hurriedly turned and ran toward the tilted side. If he was at the bottom of the tilted side, he would be buried alive or directly killed. There was no chance of survival. The originally flat floor was tilted almost vertically. Dean climbed all the way with the help of the wall and the dagger in his hand. It was like climbing a steep rock wall. Fortunately, he was aware of it in time. Although he was seriously injured at the moment and his speed was limited, he ignored the tearing pain in his chest in this life and death situation. There was only one thought in his mind, which was to climb up. Only by climbing up could he have a chance to survive. Only a trace. Finally, before the floor was completely erected, Dean climbed to the top. He punched the window and looked out. Suddenly, he saw the whole sky was rotating and the top of the building collapsed. Dean's face was pale. He tightly grasped the windowsill and stared at the street below the roof. He used the other buildings on the street as a reference. The next moment, a vibrating force seemed to pass through his arm that was holding onto the windowsill. At the same time, he roared and used all his strength to jump from the windowsill. At that moment, he felt like he was flying. Then, in the next moment, his ears were shrouded by a loud roar. Countless clouds of dust rolled up. Dean's body, which had jumped high, followed the Earth's gravity and fell heavily, rolling outside the collapsed building. Rolling all the way down, he seemed to have crashed into countless hard rocks along the way. The violent collisions made him feel as if his body was falling apart. His head fiercely knocked against a heavy object, and he immediately lost consciousness. Dean didn't know how much time had passed, but he found it difficult to breathe, and his consciousness struggled to wake up. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was darkness. He was startled. "I'm not dead." The next moment, the pain from his whole body made him fully awake. He could not help but slightly gasp in pain. He only felt that his back was against a hard thing. He stretched out his hand to support himself. He moved his body a little, and the wounds on his body suddenly tore. Dean's mouth twitched. He did not dare to move his body again. He looked up at the surroundings. There was a faint and turbid light coming from the top of his head. He looked up and vaguely seemed to be able to see the gray sky. He was relieved. When his strength recovered a little, he would be able to climb out. Suddenly, he felt a burning hunger in his stomach. He suddenly remembered that his backpack was lost in the previous chase. His heart secretly sighed, and at the same time, he was full of hatred for the hunter. However, filling his stomach was the key. He had not eaten anything since he came out of the giant wall. Last night, he was running for his life all day. Later, he fainted. He didn't know how long he was unconscious, but he remembered that it was dusk at that time. Now he could see the light, indicating that it was daytime. The most ideal situation was that he was only unconscious for one night. Dean's palm gently groped around, trying to find some clothes or other things. At the moment, he was so hungry that he could swallow even a belt or a weed. After a while, he felt some metal and broken metal pipes. He seemed to be sitting on a metal block. He smiled bitterly. He only hoped that the building collapse would attract Macon or Scott. However, whether Scott was alive or not was a problem. Thinking of this, he suddenly thought, such a violent sound. What if it attracted the undead? He immediately dispelled the idea of calling for help. If he did not wait for the rescue, but attracted a group of undead, then he would be completely finished. At this time, he suddenly felt some sticky liquid flowing toward his body. He could not help but be surprised. The water source in the building should have dried up. Was it the rainwater that penetrated from the ground outside? There was a bit of hunger in his heart. Even if it was radiation rain, he wanted to drink a little bit. As long as it could relieve the burning hunger in his stomach, he felt that he was even willing to take a bite of the undead's body. He slightly moved his arms, trying not to use strength, so as not to affect the wounds all over his body. He slowly picked up a little bit and put it in his mouth. When he was about to drink, he suddenly smelled a strong smell of blood. Is it blood? Dean was startled for a moment. At this moment, there was a slight movement in the darkness in front of him. Dean's pupil shrank. Is it roar? As if to confirm his guess, there was a sudden roar in the darkness. Several stones were smashed and flew over. A strong smell of blood came, and a ferocious roar came from 4 or 5 meters in front of him. Black behemoth. Dean felt that his heart almost stopped. It was not dead. He gritted his teeth, his palms on the ground, and moved his body. Every time he moved a little, his whole body sent a tearing pain. His forehead was full of cold sweat, but he still tightly clenched his teeth and moved back inch by inch. After moving 7 or 8 times, he only moved a distance of 2 or 3 meters, and he was so tired that he was about to collapse. At this time, he suddenly found that the roar in the darkness in front of him, although still roaring, did not come closer. It seemed to stay in that position. Dean was startled, some doubts, and suddenly thought of a possibility. It was stuck. Thinking of this, he immediately touched the fire sickle behind his waist bag. This thing was not lost. His palms were weak, but he still hit the fire sickle with trembling hands, rubbing out the fire and igniting the tinder. Soon, the faint fire dispersed the darkness nearby. Dean raised the fire to illuminate the picture in front of him. He saw the black behemoth lying in a narrow passage in front of him. Some stones were scattered around its neck, and it kept growling in a low voice, but could not crawl forward. Its body was stuck by the stones behind it. He was relieved. Fortunately, it was stuck. Otherwise, he would not be able to wait for himself to wake up, and he would be eaten in a coma. At this time, the tinder burned out, and the surrounding returned to darkness. Chapter 67. The building had collapsed, and the elevator shaft was also in the building, like a closed steel tunnel. Dean gasped slightly, staring at the deep darkness. He could only hear the continuous roar of the black behemoth, which made his hair stand up. Although he saw that the other party was stuck, it was difficult to guarantee that it would not break free. Dean smiled bitterly in his heart. If he could have a full meal at this moment, he could soon recover some strength and leave here. Unfortunately, not to mention a full meal, it was difficult to even find something that would not kill after eating. Gradually, the black behemoth's roar weakened. It seemed to feel tired, but he could still hear its heavy breathing. Time passed little by little. Dean felt his body was getting colder and colder. Waves of sleepiness hit him, and his mind became dizzy. He only faintly thought that if he fell asleep, it was likely that he would never wake up again. Thinking of this, he struggled to open his eyes and looked at the dark place where he could not even see his fingers. Staring at a boring and constant picture like this, it was easier to fall asleep. He thought about it. Using pain to stimulate the nerves was only temporary. It could not last long. If he wanted to cheer up, he had to find something that could stimulate his spirit, such as talking. Why did you chase me? I have so little meat. You can't eat your fill, and you also put yourself in danger. It's not cost-effective. Dean slightly pulled the corner of his mouth, looking at the direction of the black behemoth, and said weakly. As he spoke, the sleepiness in his mind faded a little. Still shouting, "Do you regret it? If you knew it would be like this, why did you? What kind of feed did you eat? Did you rely on radiation and viruses to grow up so big? What kind of species are you? What zodiac sign are you?" Dean said one sentence at a time. Although it was all nonsense, he could not help but laugh at himself when he thought that he had fallen into this situation. He was trapped in this dark place and could only talk to this monster who did not know human language. This laugh suddenly made him feel a lot better. At this time, he found that the blood in the wounds on his body had already dried up, and the dried blood had sealed the wounds and stopped the blood loss. A bit of desire to survive suddenly surged in his heart. He raised his hand and patted his face. He raised his spirit and slowly moved his body toward a pile of stones 5 or 6 meters away. There was a hole above the pile of stones. It was this stone that smashed the elevator shaft and let him fall in. I need to find food first, or I'll starve to death. Dean felt that he was very hungry. If it was a normal starvation for 1 or 2 days, he wouldn't be affected at all. But after coming to the giant wall, the continuous fighting and the escape, his physical strength was completely overdrawn. Now he had lost too much blood, and his body was full of injuries. The heat was dissipating very quickly. If he didn't eat something to supplement, he wouldn't be able to get out of here. There are more than 10 floors up ahead, and only a few floors down. Dean looked at the direction of the black behemoth. Apparently, it was located on the lower floor of the building. In order to save physical strength, he could only leave from its direction. However, with it blocking the elevator shaft, Dean could only climb out from the hole above. Although there was an open elevator door not far away from him, the elevator door was facing downwards. Once he stepped out, he would fall straight down. After making up his mind, Dean gritted his teeth and crawled toward the pile of broken stones. The wounds all over his body ached as he crawled, and many of them burst open. He gently inhaled the cool air, but did not stop. He still insisted on climbing. He knew that if he continued to stay here, his spirit would eventually wither, and he could only wait for death. Soon, he climbed out of the elevator shaft on the stones. The muddy light sprinkled outside the elevator shaft. The dust in the air was fluttering. The walls and windows were all broken and riddled with holes. Dean looked in the direction of the black behemoth and suddenly saw a large pile of concrete stones. There were twisted steel bars beside the stones. He was relieved. With these stones, the black behemoth wouldn't be able to climb out for a while. He dragged his body toward the pile of stones. Both sides of the elevator shaft were suspended. Once he stepped on the empty space, he would fall down. He had to be glad that he rolled down in a good position. If he rolled down directly, he would fall to his death. Half an hour later, Dean finally climbed out of the rubble at the bottom of the building and came to the ground. Looking back at the collapsed building, he still felt a lingering fear. He hid behind the stones and looked around. He didn't see any trace of the undeads. His heart was relieved. He thought that these undeads should have been attracted by the sound of the collapse, but they didn't sense him, so they gradually dispersed. Previously, inside the soft armor on his chest, there was a dark blue ball wrapped in layers to help him relieve the pain from the dagger wound on his chest. It caused his body temperature to be extremely low during the period of lethargy, so he avoided the detection of those undeads. But at this moment, the dark blue ball had already been taken out and thrown into his waist bag. Looking at the movement on the street, Dean quietly touched the front of a nearby shop. The outside of the shop was covered with vegetation and moss. Dean's eyes fell on these vegetation. He used the dagger on his waist to cut the vegetation. The vegetation was immediately cut. He looked at the juice flowing out of it. It was transparent water. He was relieved. Suddenly, he felt hungry. He quickly grabbed a few leaves of the vegetation and chewed them gently with his mouth. The dry leaves were filled with sweetness in his mouth. Dean couldn't help but chew and quickly eat a few rough leaves. He didn't care that the leaves might be contaminated with germs or high radiation content. After eating the leaves, Dean felt that the burning feeling in his stomach suddenly fell, and his body seemed to have a little strength. He didn't continue to eat the leaves, but cut the stems of the vegetation, squeezed out the water inside, sucked, and drank. The vegetation could thrive in such a place, indicating that it already had anti-radiation and antivirus characteristics. After drinking some, Dean felt a little more comfortable. Suddenly, he thought of the black behemoth stuck in the building. His eyes flashed a trace of coldness. He didn't intend to let go of the culprit who forced him into this field. As long as it was not dead, there was a possibility of breaking free. Once it broke free, it would be an unstable, dangerous thing for him. After thinking for a moment, Dean came to the street in front of the scrapped car covered with moss. The front cover of the car was tilted, and the engine had long been rusted and eroded by rotten moss. It didn't take much effort for him to remove the oil cylinder of the car. He saw that the gasoline in the oil cylinder had been oxidized and dried up. He had expected this. He used the dagger to gently scrape it, and soon a layer of black substance was scraped out. He took out the fire sickle and lit it up. He used the dark substance to burn it, and it actually lit up in an instant. Dean was a little surprised. He immediately found other scrap cars, removed the oil cylinders inside, and scraped them one by one. When half of the cars on the street were scraped, it had accumulated into a black ball the size of a basketball. Dean found some cloth from other shops and small supermarkets. These cloth fibers were already fluffy, and a little force would break them. He picked up a lot of cloth and climbed back to the building along the original road. It didn't take long for him to return to the previous elevator shaft. He was exhausted from all the tossing and turning. He sat in the elevator shaft to rest for a while, gasping for breath, and lit the torch. This time he could see more clearly. The black behemoth's upper limbs were stuck in the pile of stones. Only the part above the neck could move, and half of the front paw was exposed. Dean sneered, stirred up the dark, oily substance, rolled it on the flammable cloth and wood, and threw it at the beast. These things fell on the black behemoth's face and suddenly woke it up. It opened its eyes and growled at Dean, showing its teeth. Dean smiled and threw the torch in his hand. Whoosh! The torch fell on it and immediately ignited the cloth. Soon the fire burned. Roar! The black behemoth's whole body was on fire, and it could not help but roar in pain. Its head shook violently from side to side, and the stones on its body slightly loosened, and a lot of gravel rolled down. However, its body could not struggle, and it could not even shake the pile of stones. Seeing this, Dean was completely relieved. He was worried that it would suffer severe pain and go crazy, but now it seemed that it was far weaker than he expected. After all, when the building collapsed, it happened to be on the bottom floor, and it did not know how to escape, so it suffered great damage and lost so much blood. It was already very weak. The fire illuminated the dark elevator shaft. The black behemoth struggled and roared in the flame, but gradually the roar weakened, and it fell in the fire. Dean watched quietly, and suddenly felt that life was so fragile. Even if it was a strong life like the black behemoth, it could not escape death. Perhaps it could only blame itself for not being strong enough. Dean slightly clenched his fists, and the flame danced in his eyes. The ambition and flame in his heart were growing rapidly. After burning for more than 10 minutes, it gradually extinguished, and a faint smell of cooked meat floated in front of him. Dean used the fire sickle to ignite another torch, and saw that the black behemoth's thick hair all turned into fuel, and its body became a hot, charred corpse. Although he knew that the monster did not know how to play dead, but to be safe, Dean still picked up a stone and threw it. The stone hit, but the beast did not respond. Dean breathed a sigh of relief and carefully approached. He looked at the char body up close. The surface of the body was burnt to the point that the flesh was cracked and dripping with blood. It seems that this monster is really different from the undead. I can kill it without cutting off its head. Dean thought in his heart. After all, this monster showed beast-like consciousness, and the undead had unconscious instincts. Chapter 68. After the temperature of the corpse of the black behemoth cooled down a little, Dean stepped forward with a dagger. Looking at the burned and bloody head, he cut along the edge of the eye socket. His technique was a bit rusty, but the dagger was extremely sharp. After a lot of effort, he finally cut the head of the behemoth before he fell down. The head was warm brain tissue, exuding a strange, fishy smell, which made people feel nauseous. Dean endured the strange smell and raised his strength to turn over the brain tissue. Suddenly, the dagger touched a hard object. He was startled and quickly opened the brain tissue. It was just a piece of intracranial bone. He could not help but be disappointed, and then continued to fiddle with it. Soon, the whole brain tissue in the huge head was turned over, but still did not see anything suspicious. It seems that it is really different from the undead. Dean smiled bitterly. He thought that he could find the same ball as the one in the head of the undead. Maybe it would be useful, but it seemed that he thought too much. He shook the blood stains on the dagger, took a few steps back, and sat down in the elevator shaft next to him. He felt his hands were sore, and his physical strength was exhausted. He could only temporarily rest in the same room with the monster's burnt corpse. Fortunately, although the smell of the burnt corpse was fishy, it did not feel too uncomfortable after a long time. Dean rested against the wall and suddenly felt a little numb in his palm. He raised his palm and looked at it. The numb feeling came from the wound on the back of his hand. This was the wound that was scratched by the stones when he rolled down. There were such wounds everywhere on his body. It's actually the wound is infected. Unfortunately, there is no clean water, and the hunter did not bring the first aid kit. It is estimated that it has been pressed under the stones. Dean smiled bitterly and spat a few mouthfuls of saliva on the wound. The saliva could disinfect, and he hoped that it would have a little effect. He leaned against the elevator shaft, closed his eyes to rest, and tried to restore his physical strength as soon as possible so that he could search for food. However, soon he felt that not only the wound on his palm was infected, but other parts of his body also had a burst of numb feeling, and this numb feeling was getting stronger and stronger, and gradually turned into a sharp sting. Dean could not help but open his eyes, and his heart was a little nervous. In this wilderness, being infected was tantamount to death. He quickly lit the spare torch that he had previously extinguished. When the fire shone on his body, he suddenly saw his right hand and could not help but be shocked. His right hand was swollen to the size of his thigh, and he couldn't feel anything at all. Moreover, the wound on the back of his hand was continuously oozing yellowish-white pus. In addition, he felt that the other parts of his body that were slightly stinging were also slightly swollen. His thighs, chest, left hand, shoulder, and even his face had bursts of stinging pain. Although he did not have a mirror, he did not need to look to know that his face was probably swollen in an extremely strange way. Bacterial infection. Dean's scalp tingled. He was flustered. The symptoms were terrible. In just a moment, his body had become like this. He couldn't help but look at the corpse of the black behemoth. Did the germs come from it? However, he was very careful when he dissected it. He did not touch its brain tissue with his limbs. Suddenly, Dean thought of something. He looked down at his buttocks and saw a thick layer of blood flowing in the elevator shaft. It was the blood of the black behemoth. Could it be the germs in the blood? But my soft armor isolated it, and my body didn't come into contact with this blood. Dean didn't dare to continue sitting here. He hurriedly stood up, but his legs were numb and didn't listen to him. At the same time, the tingling feeling was getting heavier and heavier from all parts of his body. He tightly clenched his teeth, dragged his body out, and stopped when he came to the hole made by the stone. The blood of the giant beast did not flow here. He leaned against the rock and panted slightly. He looked down at his lower body and suddenly saw that there was a scratch on the soft armor behind his buttocks. The blood that flowed to his lower body had most likely seeped in from this scratch and infected his body. It was like a leech sucking blood, so he did not notice it at all. He did not even feel that his skin had touched the blood. Dean's face was pale, and there was a trace of regret in his heart. If he didn't come back to kill the monster, maybe he wouldn't be infected. I didn't expect that after escaping from the hunters and the giant beast's attack, in the end, I still couldn't escape the retribution of heaven. Dean's heart was bitter. He thought of the saying, where it is possible to forgive, forgive. Perhaps if he didn't come back, the giant beast would also starve to death here. Now it had fallen to the point of being buried with the monster. Dean leaned against the stone. The sharp tingling of his whole body had made his body tremble, and he had no strength to climb up again. He only pinned his last hope in his heart that the germs would not kill him. But contrary to his wishes, in addition to the tingling, he felt that his consciousness was getting more and more blurred. He raised his left hand and touched his forehead. He suddenly felt hot. and his heart could not help but despair. However, at the moment when he was about to pass out, he suddenly remembered that the dark blue ball on his body could absorb heat. He immediately raised his left hand, took out the dark blue ball from his waist bag, and put it on his forehead. A cold feeling immediately came, making his muddy thoughts a little clearer. He looked up, but felt that his eyelids were extremely heavy. The dark elevator shaft in front of him was even more blurred. Suddenly, he felt a slight movement in the soft armor on his chest, as if something was struggling there. He could not help but look down, struggled to lift his left hand, and slightly opened the soft armor. In his blurred vision, he suddenly saw a small earthworm-like blood-red worm, arching in the gauze wound on his chest. The front half of its body seemed to have drilled into the gauze, and the back half was still struggling. Worm. Dean was at a loss. He raised his hand and wanted to grab it, but the burning feeling in his brain made him completely unable to lift the slightest bit of strength. He slowly closed his eyes, and the last thing he saw was the worm outside the gauze on his chest. It seemed that the worm had finally broken through the obstruction and drilled into his chest. With a plop, Dean fell to the ground and fainted. After he fainted, his palm was still holding the dark blue ball. However, the cold ball gradually melted in his palm, turning into a light blue transparent liquid, and penetrated into the wound on his palm, as if it were countless living creatures. In the darkness, time passed quickly. When Dean regained consciousness again, he was awakened by hunger. He opened his eyes in a daze, but saw the familiar scene in the elevator shaft. He could not help but be stunned. He did not die. He suddenly thought of the high fever before he fainted and quickly touched his head. His body temperature was normal. At this time, he noticed that his swollen palm had returned to its original shape. Not only was the swelling reduced, but he also regained consciousness. He hurriedly sat up and looked at his whole body. There was no change in his body, but there were many small scratches on the dusty black soft armor. He subconsciously looked back at the black behemoth, only to see its charred body still stuck there, and its head was cut open. Dean was stunned. Was the previous body infection and high fever all a dream? Was it just a dream that he sat here, tired, and fell asleep after dissecting this monster? Chapter 69. It was so dark. How could he see? Dean patted his face. A little pain let him know that he was not dreaming. He could not help but look up at the hole above the pile of stones. The light was dim, and only a little light shone on the pile of stones. The elevator shaft was still dark. However, in his field of vision at the moment, everything on the ground could be seen clearly. Dean blinked his eyes. Suddenly, he thought of the blood-colored worm he saw before he fainted. Suddenly, his hair stood up. He hurriedly opened the soft armor on his chest to look. He saw the white gauze was still rolled up. The blood that had seeped out had dyed the gauze red, and the blood had dried up. Dean gently touched the wound, but did not feel any pain. He immediately untied the gauze circle by circle. When the gauze peeled off, Dean suddenly saw the wound on his chest. To his surprise, the dagger wound, which should have been vertical, had completely healed, leaving only a shallow white scar. In addition, on the healed scar, there was a dark red blood mark that was half a finger long. It was like a blood vessel protruding from the skin. Dean's face changed. He gently reached out to touch it. A slight touch came from the blood mark. Dean thought of the blood-colored worm that had drilled into the gauze. His face turned ugly. Could it be that the worm had drilled into his body? Anyone who thought of an unknown worm drilling into their body would be horrified. Dean thought of his dagger. He immediately picked it up and cut the blood mark on his chest. He suspected that the worm was living in the blood mark. The dagger gently pierced the blood mark. Dark red blood flowed out from it. At the same time, Dean suddenly felt a sharp pain transmitted to the nerves in his brain. His whole body could not help but tremble, especially the left side of his heart. It was like his heart had been dug out. This was a real heartache. His palm trembled. He immediately stopped stabbing. He felt that if he continued to stab, he would die from the pain. When the dagger was released, the pain suddenly eased a bit. Dean was already sweating from the pain. He gasped and looked down. He saw that the blood mark was rapidly healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It didn't take long for it to return to its original state. Only the blood flowing out of the skin on his chest proved that he had previously stabbed here. As the wound healed, the intense pain gradually subsided. Dean's face was a bit ugly. Could it be that the insect and his body had grown together? His face changed for a moment, but he didn't have the courage to continue to try to puncture the wound. He secretly thought that if he could find a microscope in the ruins, or if he could use the knowledge from the super chip to make one, then he would be able to see the changes in his chest. But for now, he could only put it aside for the time being. This feeling made him a little uncomfortable, but there was nothing he could do about it. However, when he thought of how close he was to death this time, being able to survive was already a great fortune amidst the misfortune. The uncomfortable feeling in his heart faded a little. My vision is able to see things clearly in the dark, which is most likely caused by the previous bacterial infection, and that blood color bug is probably one of the germs, and it is the strongest one, even surpassing the concept of germs. It is a brand new mutated microorganism that can live in the blood of other creatures. Dean regained his calmness and thought about what happened before he fainted. Obviously, this blood-colored worm had crawled onto his body from the blood of the black behemoth. Perhaps it had been residing in the blood of the black behemoth before it died. After it died, it had found him a new host. This also explained why he was infected with the monster's blood, but was not infected by the virus and turned into a zombie. Because in the monster's blood, it was likely that there were a large number of such tiny blood-colored bugs crawling along the blood into his body. These little guys that originally lived in the monster's blood had already developed antibodies to the virus. So when they entered his body, they also enhanced his resistance to the virus, which saved him from turning into a zombie. However, this was only Dean's speculation. Only by finding a microscope to study could he understand what was going on. Dean looked at his hands and feet and moved a little. He felt nothing strange, so he was a little relieved. He turned around and climbed along the pile of stones. As soon as he exerted force on his feet, he suddenly felt as light as a swallow and jumped high into the hole outside the pile of stones. Dean was a little stunned. He looked at his hands and feet again, recalling the huge, swollen appearance before. Suddenly, an idea came to him. He bent down to grab a half-meter-big stone and gently hugged it with both hands. As expected, Dean threw the stone away and gently bounced in place. With a whoosh, he jumped 3 or 4 meters high, and this was under the condition that he did not use his full strength. It must be known that 3 or 4 meters high was not the position of the head, but the height of the soles of the feet, which had exceeded the physical strength of ordinary people by too much. Even people who had extreme training for decades may not be able to reach such an inhuman level. Sure enough, my strength and speed have all improved, and the improvement is not a little bit. Even my vision has evolved. I can see things in the dark, but the most significant change is in my sense of smell. Dean gently landed. Previously, he felt that the smell in the elevator shaft was somewhat unbearable, and now that he knew the changes in his body, he immediately closed his eyes. Suddenly, he only felt countless smells floating into his nose. In the dark picture with his eyes closed, he seemed to be able to see a group of things exuding a variety of smells, with his body as the center, spread everywhere. He could directly smell the source of the smell and judge the distance. Even if he closed his eyes, he could know the surrounding environment by the smell alone. Dean opened his eyes, and his heart was a little shocked. The improvement of his sense of smell was too terrifying, just like a hound. The increase in my sense of smell isn't proportional to my physique at all. It's too much. The monster from before also had an extremely strong sense of smell. Could it be that when this blood-colored worm crawled in my body, it also brought some of its abilities into my body? Dean was startled and could not help but feel excited. This sense of smell was like a super radar for him. He could smell any monster with strong smell in the distance. It could be said that this was a very strong perception and life-saving ability. With his super sense of smell, Dean's confidence in survival suddenly doubled. Now he believed that he could kill ordinary undeads head-on. Even if he encountered a monster as terrible as this black behemoth, he could sense it from a distance and avoid it in advance. At this time, Dean suddenly smelled his own sweat from the countless smells. It was emitted from the backpack, and the location was in the pile of stones at the bottom of the front, 26 meters away. He was happy and immediately grabbed the broken wall and jumped to the bottom of the building. This was the original position of the second floor. At this moment, all the things in the office were piled up at the bottom. Dean jumped over. At this moment, his whole body had healed, but his stomach was still very hungry. There were dry food and water in the backpack, as well as the dark blue ball. Thinking of the ball, he suddenly remembered that he was still holding one in his hand. He could not help but be startled for a moment. He did not see it when he woke up. He looked at the ground at that time and was sure that he would not remember it wrong. It did not fall on the ground. No more. Dean looked at his two hands and suddenly saw that the palm of his left hand was sticky. Previously, he only cared about the blood on his chest and did not notice this. He saw a layer of light yellow mucus on his palm, exuding a fishy smell. He was stunned and suddenly remembered that before he passed out, his left hand was still holding the dark blue ball. How could the ball disappear? Chapter 70. Dean thought for a moment. It seemed that this was the only explanation. Could it be that the melted dark blue ball can be absorbed by the body? Is it the bloodworm or the dark blue ball that strengthened my physique? Dean thought for a moment. Perhaps he would get the answer after he returned to the giant wall and asked the consortium's people. He jumped to the bottom of the building and moved away the piles of stones and other debris. With his current physical strength, these heavy stones were easily lifted. Following the smell, he soon found the backpack hidden under the stones. The dry food in the backpack was flattened, the drinking pot was crushed, and the water was drained. After Dean ate the dry food, the hunger in his abdomen subsided. His physical strength seemed to recover a bit. He followed the smell and found the dark blue ball that was scattered in another place. In addition, not far from the bag, he found a hunter's bow and arrow. Dean grabbed the black ancient bow. The previous heavy bow fell into his hand, but the weight was just right. He gently pulled the bowstring and immediately pulled out half a moon. He could not help but be happy. This bow and arrow was the hunter's weapon. Naturally, its lethality was not small. Although he could not bring it back to the giant wall, but at least he could secretly use it outside the giant wall. After packing up his things, Dean draped the bow and arrow in cloth and hung it on his back. Then he carried the backpack and left the collapsed building. I don't know where Mason and the others are. Dean came out to the street and looked at the sun. It was already noon. He went back to the place where he had separated from Mason and the other two. He immediately smelled their residual smell on the ground and followed the smell. The eighth area was no longer a safe area. Undeads were everywhere. Mason and the others could be in danger any time. Dean was anxious. He followed the smell all the way. Suddenly, the smell disappeared in front of street. Dean could not help but be surprised, and then smiled wryly. Did the three brats use the method he taught them to eliminate the smell? At this time, the silent ruins in front of them suddenly burst into roars of undeads. Dean was startled. He quickly chased after the source of the sound. Through the corner of a house, he saw 7 or 8 people gathered in front of shop. On both sides of the street, there were undeads approaching them, brandishing their claws and pouncing on them. Scott, Zach. Dean couldn't help but be startled when he saw them. Among these 7 or 8 people, there were Scott, Mia, and 4 consortium scavengers. The other 2 were Zach, who was separated from him, and another new scavenger boy from the same batch. At the moment, Zach and the scavenger boy were protected in the center of the team. Scott and Mia were holding their daggers. Their complexion was ugly as they looked at the approaching undeads. With their skills, they could barely fight 1 undead, at most 2, but there were 6 or 7 undeads in front of them. Moreover, there seemed to be more undeads attracted by the roar. "Retreat, retreat," Scott whispered with an ugly expression. The 8 of them formed a circle and retreated to the back of the shop. The undead roared and rushed forward. The first undead took the lead and rushed toward Scott. Its ferocious face made the 4 consortium scavengers behind Scott pale. The hand holding the dagger slightly trembled. Scott roared and slashed with his sword. Puff! The dagger slashed at the zombie's neck, but the blade was not sharp enough, so it got stuck in the spine. Scott's face changed and hurriedly kicked the zombie. At this time, Mia was about to come to support, but suddenly 2 other undeads rushed from the side. Mia was scared and quickly turned back to block. She pinned down one of the undeads, while the remaining one rushed towards the 4 consortium scavengers. The 4 consortium scavengers looked extremely nervous as they desperately rushed out. One of them was about to slash down with his sword, but the undead quickly grabbed his arm. The undead immediately rushed up and bit the youth's throat. Blood sprayed all over the youth's face. The 3 scavengers were scared and could only continue to retreat. They even abandoned Scott and Mia, who were fighting the undeads in front of them. The new scavenger boy also ran behind the 3 scavengers. Zack stood there, anxious, but didn't know what to do. At this time, the undead that was biting the youth suddenly looked at him. "Run!" Scott snarled. Zack's face was pale, but he didn't know where he got the courage. He held his dagger and rushed forward. When he was close to the undead, he suddenly rolled and kicked the undead's ankle. Puff! The undead suddenly tripped. Zack took the opportunity to get up and was about to stab the undead. Suddenly, a roar sounded behind him. It was another undead rushing over. Zack's face was pale. At this time, a stone flew and hit the undead's head. It fell to the ground and didn't move again. Scott, Mia, and Zack, who were fighting the undead, couldn't help but look at the source of the sound. They saw a figure quickly approaching. The figure caught up with an undead. When the undead heard the sound, the figure jumped and kicked its spine. The undead suddenly crawled forward. Its chest rubbed against the ground for 2 or 3 meters. Before it could struggle to get up, the figure quickly caught up and stepped on its back. With a fire axe in his hand, he chopped at its head. Puff! The undead's head was suddenly cut off. Scott, Mia, and Zack couldn't help but be shocked. The scavengers of the 3 consortiums and the new boy heard the noise and looked back. They couldn't help but be stunned. They saw that the person who killed the undead was Dean. As soon as he cut off the head of the undead, Dean quickly ran towards Zack. The moment the undead crawled up, Dean threw the axe in his hand. Puff! He chopped the back of the undead's neck and it fell to the ground. However, it didn't hurt the undead's head. It continued to struggle to get up. Dean took advantage of the time to catch up with the undead. He grabbed the axe handle and chopped. Bang! The undead's head fell, and the axe handle was broken. Dean lightly exhaled. Fortunately, he caught up. He didn't use the hunter's bow and arrow to avoid being exposed. When he saw that Zack and the others were surrounded, he immediately hid the hunter bow and arrow under the chassis of a nearby scrap car. Then he grabbed the fire axe that he had taken from the building and rushed towards them. Unfortunately, the handle of the fire axe had decayed too much, so it broke in 2 strikes. Is it you? Scott was horrified. In just 2 breaths, he killed 2 undead. What kind of method was this? Be careful, Dean shouted as he grabbed the axe and swung it. Puff! The axe was like a metal brick. It hit the chest of the undead that was rushing towards Scott. It was knocked down, but it didn't cause any fatal injury. Scott came back to his senses and hurriedly stabbed with his dagger, nailing the undead to the ground. Dean said to Zack, "Go inside and hide." He turned around and rushed to Mia, grabbed the dagger of the young scavenger on the ground, and stabbed it at the undead's head. The undead's swift movements became clear in Dean's eyes. The dagger pierced through the jaw and penetrated the head of the undead. The undead's throat screamed twice and powerlessly fell down. Chapter 71. Puff! Puff! Dudian cooperated with Scott and Mia to quickly kill the undeads that were running towards them. Dudian said as he smelled the smell of the undeads moving in the distance, "We shouldn't stay here for a long time. We have to leave immediately. Scott knew that the fight would attract other undeads, so he didn't rest. He picked up the bag that was thrown in front of the shop. He took out a sheepskin scroll and opened it. Soon he found the current location. He put away the map and said to Dudian, "Come with me. The 8th region is no longer safe. We have to return to the 9th region." Dudian nodded slightly and raised his hand to call Zack to come over. Zack quickly ran over and said in a pleasantly surprised tone, "I knew you would survive." It seemed that he wanted to ask something, but when he saw Dudian blink his eyes, he suddenly woke up and stopped talking. His face was full of joy. The 3 consortium scavengers and the new boy who were hiding in the shop quickly followed Zack out. They looked at the bleeding youth on the ground. Their expressions were somewhat complicated and ugly. Mia noticed their eyes. She coldly snorted and said in a disgusted tone, "Cowards! When the undead bit his throat, you had the opportunity to kill it, but you ran away in fear. You're not as brave as a child. Shameful." The child she was referring to was naturally Zack, who fought back at the end. The 3 scavengers were ashamed. They clenched their teeth and didn't dare to answer. The new boy who ran away with them bowed his head in fear. He secretly looked at Dudian. It seemed that he wanted to say something, but didn't dare to open his mouth. Scott looked at them and sighed. He slightly shook his head and said to Dudian, "Let's go." Dudian nodded and glanced at the surrounding environment. He secretly remembered this place. When he had time, he would come back to get the bow and the dark blue ball. They followed Scott and quietly moved along the edge of the street. Along the way, Dudian fully felt the benefits of his sharp sense of smell. Whenever he smelled a large group of undeads, he would suggest Scott to take a detour. If he met 2 or 3 undeads, he would directly kill them. Scott didn't dare to look down on Dudian because of his age after seeing his extraordinary power. Therefore, Dudian suggested several detours, and all of them were adopted by him. After half a day of traveling, everyone finally came out of the 8th district and returned to the 9th district that had been scavenged more than 10 times. After arriving at the 9th region, Scott and the others finally relaxed their tense nerves, but they didn't dare to linger near the border. They continued to move forward and went deeper into the heart of the 9th region. Only then did they completely relax. Along the way, the crowd did not encounter any more walking corpses, not even small monsters like the bone-biter rat. There was basically nothing left in the shops on both sides of the broken streets in District 9, except for the broken stones. "We're finally out." Scott heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't continue his journey anxiously. Instead, he found a clean place to sit down and rest. Mia put her bag on the side of the gravel. She curiously looked at Dudian. "You are a scavenger who has just joined the consortium. I heard that you are the seed of the consortium, so you have received 2 blessings. But how can you be so strong after only 2 blessings? Did you pick up any other treasures?" Scott and the other 3 consortium scavengers, as well as the new recruit, looked at Dudian. They were very curious about this question. Previously, in the 8th region, there were undeads around at any time. They were worried that their voices would attract undeads, so they refrained from talking. Perhaps there was another reason. They were worried that such a bold question would cause Dudian to be unhappy and abandon them in the 8th region. Dudian was prepared for it. "I don't know the reason. I just fainted while escaping. After I woke up, I felt that my strength was much stronger than before." His words were half true and half false. Even if the consortium tracked him down, he would have a statement. Scott and Mia looked at each other in puzzlement. Suddenly, Mia thought of something. Her face slightly changed. You weren't bitten by an undead, right?" The 3 consortium scavengers who were sitting next to Dudian were startled. They quickly got up and moved away from Dudian by 7 or 8 meters. Dudian was curious. "If I was bitten by an undead, wouldn't I turn into an undead?" Scott's expression was unsightly as he said, "You're right. However, the speed at which one turns into an undead varies according to their injuries. If you're bitten on the throat, chest, or other parts, then you'll be infected immediately. If it is just a scratch on the skin, then the infection speed will be much slower." "How long has it been since you woke up?" "Half a day. Generally, the slowest infection speed is 3 days. Scott looked at Dudian. "In other words, if you are infected, Then in the next 2.5 days, you will completely turn into an undead. If you don't turn into an undead after 2.5 days, then it means that you're not infected. Dudian nodded slightly. He naturally was not infected by an undead. However, Scott's words made him a bit nervous. He didn't know if the blood-colored worms were a kind of infection. We have been outside the giant wall for 4 days. In 6 days, we will return to the giant wall. Scott looked at Dudian and hesitated. We should separate for the time being. Dudian looked at them. In addition to Zach, who was worried, there was more or less fear in their eyes. It was as if they were facing an undead. He couldn't help but smile and whispered, "All right, but I want to borrow your map so that I won't be able to find a way back if we separate." "Okay." Scott didn't hesitate and immediately agreed. Dudian looked back at Zach and smiled. "I'll go and find Mason and Sham. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Wait for me here." Zach's eyes were red as he clenched his teeth. "It's all my fault. We drag you down." "I'm sorry, Dean. I'm sorry. Don't talk nonsense. We are all brothers." Dudian laughed. Zach couldn't help but burst into tears as he gently sobbed. Scott, Mia, and the rest were silent. Dudian waved his hand and took the map that Scott carefully handed over and turned to leave. After disappearing from the sight of Scott and others, Dudian immediately ran at full speed. He followed the previous route back to area number 8 and collected the dark blue balls from the brains of the corpses that he killed along the way. It didn't take long for him to return to the place where he collected the bow and arrows. He found the bow and the dark blue balls from the bottom of the scrap car. He immediately searched the surroundings for Mason and Sham. Along the way, whenever he encountered a lone walking corpse, he would directly kill it at close range. Although his fighting skills were still very immature, but with speed and strength, he could completely kill the undead before they pounced on him. However, if he encountered more than 3 undead at the same time, Dudian could only escape. After all, if a swarm of undead pounced on him, no matter how fast he would be caught. Once caught, he would gradually be surrounded. This was the horror of the corpses. Even the hunters didn't dare to let the corpses get close to them. 2 days later, Dudian finally found Mason hiding in the ruins of a building. The reason why he was able to find him was because of the smell of his excrement. This also made Dudian learn that in the future, in the wilderness, you can't urinate or defecate anywhere. Even if you can't bear it, you have to bury it and leave as soon as possible. Dudian was about to return to area number 8 to continue to look for Sham after he sent Mason back to area number 9. But suddenly he smelled Sham's smell in area number 9. He couldn't help but be stunned. Following the smell, Dudian found Sham alone in the 9th region. He was speechless as he didn't expect the kid to come back alone. Dudian's heart was finally relieved after he saw that all 3 of them were safe. After settling the 3 of them, Dudian returned to area number 8 and began his undead hunting plan. In the blink of an eye, for days passed. Chapter 72, 213, 214. In a remote area of the 9th region, Dean counted the number of dark blue balls in his hand. This was the total number of undeads he had hunted these days in the 8th region. A total of 217 balls. To Dean's regret, he wanted to learn the hunter's method of ambushing the black beasts. He wanted to ambush from a high place and then use sound to attract the undeads. As a result, although the undeads were attracted, but his shooting accuracy was a mess. Out of 10 arrows, none of them would hit the target. Occasionally, he would hit the target by pure luck. For this reason, Dean continued to practice his shooting accuracy in the next few nights. After 3 days of serious training, he was able to achieve 1 in 2 accuracy within the range of 50 meters. On average, he would hit the target by 1 in 2 arrows. However, the objects he used to practice shooting were still objects, and the size of the objects was too large. The initial rapid progress was normal, but if he wanted to improve further, it would be much more difficult. After all, the undeads could move. Moreover, it was not enough to hit the undeads. He must accurately hit their heads. Although his physique was higher than ordinary people, but in just a few days, he could barely hit the slow, wandering undeads. On average, 1 out of 3 arrows would miss the target. If he wanted to hit their heads, he had to rely on luck. This made Dean feel pain. If he could master the bow and arrow, he was confident that the number of undeads he could hunt would at least triple. Digging away the stones, Dean rolled the dark blue balls into the bag and hid them in the pile of stones. After all, if all these were brought back to the consortium, such a large number would cause a lot of fluctuations. Only 7 should be fine. By the way, I can see how much the consortium gave me. Dean secretly removed the bow and arrow in his hand and hid them in the pile of stones. In order not to attract attention, he deliberately went to the 9th region. After all, the 8th region had just been cleaned up. It was the consortium's main scavenging area. Hiding there would inevitably be exposure. After hiding the things, Dean turned around and carried a huge bag. He followed the direction of the map towards the giant wall at the edge of the 9th region. In the distance, the towering giant wall was faintly visible. It was not until this moment that Dean felt the charm of this giant wall. Even if it was a monster like the Black Behemoth, in front of such a towering giant wall, it was estimated that it was like a mayfly trying to shake a tree. It would be difficult to cause any movement. Dusk, in front of the giant wall. Scott looked at the sunset. He felt that the passage would soon open. He couldn't help but look at Mason and the other two. You said that Dean is still alive. Why hasn't he come yet? The passage will only open for 10 minutes. If it closes, then he will have to wait until the next time it opens. Macon looked into the distance and became anxious. He knows the time. He shouldn't be delayed. Mia looked at Sham. You said you saw him 4 days ago? Are you sure? I'm very sure, Sham solemnly said. He had long heard about Dean from Zach's mouth, but he didn't believe that Dean would really become an undead. Mia looked at him. I hope you are not lying. It's not good for anyone. Suddenly, there was a slight tremor. Suddenly, the giant wall passage beside them slowly opened. The iron plate on the ground was propped up high like a steel mouth. A figure walked out of it. It was Peter. Huh. Peter came out and saw Scott and others outside the giant wall. He was startled. How come? There are so few people. Scott was relieved to see him, but his face turned ugly. There are a lot of undeads in the area number 8. Most of them are migrating from other areas. He knew that it was impossible for the hunters to ignore so many undeads. Even if the hunters ignored them, he couldn't say it out loud. Undeads? Peter was startled. He suddenly thought of something and smiled. I heard from the boss that there was a monster riot in an area. I didn't expect it to be in the area number 8. You are really unlucky. His eyes swept and his face slightly changed. Where is Dean? He may be infected by the undeads. He can't come back. Scott hesitated for a moment, but still said his thoughts. Although Zach and others said that they had seen Dean, but he didn't believe it. Peter's face changed. He sighed. I was very optimistic about him, but I didn't expect. Well, you go in first. The guards are waiting for you inside. Scott nodded slightly and went into the passage with Mia. The other 3 scavengers and the new boy also went in. Mason and the other 2 stood and didn't move. They were anxiously looking into the distance. Peter knew that the 4 of them had graduated from the same dormitory, so he didn't rush them. He just sighed and quietly looked at the vast and barren plains in front of him. Every time he saw this grassland, he would think of the countless scavengers and hunters who had been buried in the ruins across the grassland while they were out on mission. Life was so fragile. He sighed slightly and felt a little sad. Suddenly, a surprised voice sounded. It's him. It's Dean. Peter was startled. He squinted his eyes and saw a black ball running from the distance. As he got closer, he saw that the ball was a huge round bag. Dean was under the bag. Peter froze for a moment, but his face couldn't help but smile. Dean saw Mason and Peter waiting for him in front of the passage. He immediately sped up his pace. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't have an accident. Mason dropped the backpack and was the first to rush over. He punched Dean's chest. Dean smiled. It's good that you know. Later when I tell you to run, just run. Don't be like a woman. You are like a woman. When you first entered the special training camp, you were whiter than the other girls in the dormitory. Mason laughed. Dean rolled his eyes and came in front of Peter. I've been waiting for a long time. Peter smiled and said, It's good that you came back. The harvest seems to be very good. Go in. The passage will close in 6 minutes. Dean nodded slightly and went into the passage. Mason, Zach, and Sham also picked up their backpacks and followed behind Dudian in a joyful manner. They went back to the wall along the dark passage. When they stepped out of the stairs, Dean saw Scott and others. In addition to them, there were more than a dozen guards from the Holy Church. Dean? Scott and others were stunned when they saw Dean. Dean looked at the guards and asked, Who are they? Scott recovered and thought of Mason and others' words. He understood that Dean wasn't infected by the undead. Otherwise, even the slightest wound would be infected after 6 days. These are the guards of the Radiant Church. They're doing a routine inspection. This is what they do every time we return. Our armors and belongings have to be delivered to the Radiant Church. With the blessing of the Lord Priest, these items will be purified of the plague and virus. Only then will we be able to return them, Scott explained. Chapter 73. Dudian nodded, indicating that he understood. There was no surprise in his heart. The concentration of radiation outside the giant wall was too high, so the items were covered with a thick layer of radiation and germs. Naturally, they needed to be cleaned. Only, what made him slightly concerned was that the one in charge of this task was actually the Radiant Church. Your items. A guard in his early 20s whispered to Dudian, Tell me your name. My name is Dean, and these are my belongings. Dean handed over the bag on his back when he heard the words. The young guard waved to his companion next to him. A guard of light came over and picked up the huge bag on Dean's back. He was wearing a white mask on his face. Good guy, it's heavy enough. I hope it's not full of scrap copper and iron. He sent the bag to the back of the escort car. A female guard was standing in the car. She tore a piece of paper from her wrist. Dudian's name was written on it. She attached the paper to the top of the bag and threw it into the escort car. Next, the young guard waved his hand. Dudian thought for a moment. He took out 7 dark blue balls from his waist bag and said, I also saw these. Do I need to send them together? The young guard looked down and couldn't help but be startled. He looked up and down at Dudian. Little guy, where did you pick this up? In the head of the undead. Dudian answered truthfully. The young guard stared at him. How did you think of turning over the head of the undead? Curious. Dudian replied. The young guard stared at his eyes. He saw that the latter was looking at him without blinking. He nodded slightly. I'll take this thing and put on your account. As for the value, your consortium will naturally inform you. He looked at Dudian meaningfully and took the 7 dark blue balls. Dudian read a bit of pity and indifference from the guard's eyes. He couldn't help but feel strange, but he knew that it was not appropriate to ask. He turned away and opened the passage. At this time, the young guard put away the 7 dark blue balls and took inventory of the 3 people's supplies. When the passage was closed, Peter saw that there were no other scavengers behind him. He immediately waved his hand and said, Everyone get in the car. Dean. Scott opened the curtain of a black carriage and waved to Dean, Come here. Dean didn't refuse his invitation, so he stepped into the carriage. Mia and another newbie boy sat in the spacious carriage, while the 3 consortium scavengers sat in another carriage. We've wronged you before, Scott said apologetically after the carriage started moving. Dean shook his head. It's human nature. I don't blame you. Scott looked at him and saw that he did not really bear a grudge. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, Speaking of which, you are our savior this time. After the 3 days of cleansing day, I will treat you to a good meal. It's a pity that you are too young, so I can't bring you to those fancy places. Cough, in the future, if you have any trouble or don't understand, just tell me. If I can help you, I will definitely do my best. Scott's expression was slightly solemn, although he was laughing at the beginning, but it was obvious that this sentence was what he really wanted to say. Dean smiled. When he and Mia were surrounded by the undeads, they obviously could have abandoned the consortium scavengers and left. But they chose to stay. This alone made him admire them. After all, he was a person who had experienced life and death. He was very clear about the despair in the face of death. He understood that under that kind of despair, people would breed evil thoughts. To be able to suppress these evil thoughts was the real nature. So Dean admired them. "What is the cleansing day that you just mentioned?" Dean asked curiously. Scott patted his head and laughed. "You see, I forgot to tell you. Fortunately, Peter isn't here. Otherwise, he would nag me again. I was going to enter the 8th region to scavenge. I'll have free time in the evening, so I can slowly introduce you to the newcomers." He sighed and shook his head slightly. He looked at Dean. "Cleansing day is a routine after each return. Like those items, our bodies also need to be carefully checked before we can enter the giant wall's living area. Cleansing day is a total of 3 days. The longest incubation period of the virus in the body is 3 days. If 3 days pass and the person doesn't turn into an undead, then it proves that the person doesn't carry the virus and can return to the living area." Dean was enlightened. Indeed, undeads and monsters could be blocked by the giant wall. But the infiltration of the virus was much more terrible. Once a person was bitten by an undead and returned to the giant wall, the disaster caused would be extremely terrible. If the spread of the virus wasn't controlled in time, then the entire area would be infected. Suddenly, Dean thought of the boundary wall between the commercial area and the residential area. The towering walls and the giant gates were not only to distinguish between the rich and the poor. Their original meaning was to divide the various areas so that the virus would not penetrate into the wall and infect all the areas at once. Dean thought about it more and more likely. At this time, Scott curiously asked, "Dean, how did your strength become so strong? You have only received 2 blessings, but your strength is stronger than me. I have received 19 blessings." Mia and the newcomer who were sitting next to him were also curious. Dean saw that they hadn't forgotten this question. His heart was helpless. Sure enough, people's curiosity would never fade if it wasn't satisfied. "The air inside the wall is good," Dean said. Scott's forehead was full of black lines. "You are too stiff to change the topic." Mia couldn't help but laugh. Dean was a bit embarrassed. "I really don't know. I was in a coma and woke up like this." Well. Scott saw that he couldn't ask anything, so he could only give up. It didn't take long for everyone to come to a certain place on the outer edge of the commercial district. This was the edge of the residential area, where few people came, but the radiation in the air was much thinner than the other outer edge areas. The concentration was almost the same as the residential area. The reason why there were few people here was because it was a forbidden area. Withered vine-like old trees grew on both sides of the street. There were several dark and gloomy castles standing on several small hills. Dean and others' carriage stopped in front of one of the castles. Everyone got off the carriage. When the guard in front of the castle saw the carriage from afar, he opened the gate of the castle. A 3-meter-tall dark red horse galloped out of the castle. This horse was heroic and full of scarlet fur. With one look, one could tell that it was a war horse that loved to fight. There was a young man sitting on the back of the horse. He gently pulled the reins of the horse. The horse stopped in front of everyone. He didn't wear a helmet. His black hair was loose on his shoulders. His snow-white cheeks made him look very handsome. He glanced at Dean, Scott, and others. "Come with me." Scott respectfully nodded and took the lead with Mia to follow the horse. Dean, Macon, and the other 2 looked at each other and followed. Everyone knew that the extraordinary young man in front of them was the Knight of Light of the Holy Church. It was much more noble than the average knight. One must have a very high quality in order to get the title. If the general aristocracy had a knight following them, then it was the basic equipment of the aristocracy. But to have a Knight of Light following them, or to cultivate a Knight of Light from their own family, then it was a glory. It was a very prestigious thing in the aristocracy. In addition to the glorious identity, the strength of the Knight of Light was also unquestionable. They were the first vanguard to eliminate the evil alchemists and potions. Ordinary knights had to dismount and salute when they saw the Knight of Light. At this time, everyone followed the Knight of Light into the castle. They came to the basement of the castle. Everyone has a room. Bathe and change clothes. Stay here for 3 days. There is the Book of Light inside. It's best to read it. Even if your body isn't polluted, it can purify your mind. The youth indifferently said, "Yes, Sir Knight." Scott respectfully nodded. He was already familiar with the rules here. Dean and others had just arrived, so they followed Scott to meet up with him. Chapter 74. You come with me. The youth pointed to Mia and said. Mia seemed to know where to go and respectfully nodded. After Mia left with the Knight of Light, the curious Macon immediately asked, "Where is she going? Why isn't she with us?" Scott laughed. "Why are you with us? She is a woman. Of course, she has to go to the ladies' room on the other side. There is no shelter here." Mason's face turned red as he heard this. He was embarrassed. "Well, take a bath and change your clothes. Someone will come over to check our bodies," Scott said as he took off the black soft armor that was stained with blood and threw it to the side. Then he walked to the side of the toilet bowl naked and scooped up the clear water to wash his body. This was a big bath. People in this world were very taboo, but they had to do a big bath after coming back from outside the giant wall. Mason and the other two followed suit. They took off the black armor and began to wash their bodies. After 10 days of activities outside the giant wall, their bodies were very uncomfortable with sweat. Their bodies emitted bursts of stench. They wanted to wash for a long time. Dean's character was relatively introverted. This could be seen from his usual few words. He pulled up a curtain and hung it on the bed. Then he took off the scratched armor and began to take a bath. Dean couldn't help but secretly sigh every time he took a bath. He was not used to dry rubbing without shower gel. "Look, Dean, this guy is doing this again." He also used a curtain to cover himself. There are only men here. What is there to cover? It's like this during the special training. Sometimes I wonder if Dean is a girl. Macon and the other two saw this and laughed. Dean put his head out of the curtain and fiercely said, "Mason, if you talk nonsense again, I will go and tell Bei Weiwei that you secretly drew her portrait." "Zach, don't laugh. Last time you secretly took someone's money. Do you want me to say it?" "Sham, if you follow me again, I will go and tear down your tavern." The three immediately covered their mouths. Scott, who was watching from the side, laughed out loud. At the same time, in a secret castle in the commercial district, under the claws of a black crow, a letter was sent into the castle through the window and landed in a room on the second floor. This was a very luxurious and spacious room. A dark red fluffy carpet covered most of the floor, and a large red Polonia desk was even older than the owner sitting on it. It was a fat middle-aged man, leaning against the creaking chair and casually playing with two pure colored agates in his hand. He caught a glimpse of the letter that had fallen on the desk. "What kind of news is it?" They actually sent it over without going through the proper procedures. He frowned slightly, but he still sat up and opened the letter. The words were densely packed on the snow-white paper with a faint fragrance. He looked at it for a while, and his face suddenly changed. Byrne didn't come back? How is that possible? Wasn't he supposed to finish up the work? Why didn't he come back on time? He stared at the letter, his expression uncertain. The consortium had set a time for the hunters and scavengers to go out. The consequences of violation were extremely serious. If they didn't come back on time, there was more than a 70% chance that they would die. The remaining 30% chance was that they were on the verge of death, trapped, or met with a crisis and couldn't come back in time. However, Byrne's situation was different. He was only responsible for finishing up the work. He didn't go to the gray area to hunt. The risk factor was extremely low. If he didn't come back on time, then the possibility of death was extremely high. He held the letter in anger. Byrne was one of the hunters he was responsible for. If he lost Byrne, his position in the consortium would be affected. Moreover, the money he earned would also decline a lot. I must investigate clearly. He immediately made a decision. His eyes were cold. If he doesn't listen to me and goes to the gray area, then I can't blame others. Even if the madman comes to find me, I can't bear the responsibility. But if he was killed by hunters from other consortiums in the 8th region, then it would be a problem of our consortium's intelligence. He immediately picked up the quill and quickly wrote down the order to thoroughly investigate the matter. After all, although the Melon Consortium was big, but the loss of a hunter was not a trivial matter. Moreover, such a strange loss was likely to involve intelligence loopholes or spies of the consortium. Mellon Consortium's scavenger headquarters in the commercial district. Two pieces of information were quickly passed to the headquarters. The first floor of the headquarters building was responsible for receiving and handling basic information. The second floor was the administrative floor, which dealt with important matters. At the moment, the two pieces of information were sent to a spacious office on the second floor. Information from the hunter headquarters. A middle-aged man in his 40s sat on the desk. He had a mustache and was wearing a suit. He was sitting upright and respectful. He used to be a butler of the Mel family and was deeply loved by the master. Now he was assigned here to manage the scavengers. His power and identity were much higher than a butler. There is a hunter in the 8th region who didn't come back. Strange, the 8th region has been cleaned up. There are only some minor matters left. How come the hunter didn't come back? The middle-aged man stared at the letter and frowned. The higher-ups suspect that the hunter had an accident, so they sent this letter. Is it because they suspect that there is a problem among us scavengers? After all, he had been running this business for more than 10 years. He immediately figured out the meaning of the higher-ups. His face was somewhat gloomy. If they thoroughly found out that there was a spy among the scavengers, then the staff of the headquarters would be criticized and even punished. However, he also felt helpless. After all, the loss of a hunter couldn't be made up for by any number of scavengers. If they find out that there's a spy, then we can only accept it. The middle-aged man sighed and put the letter aside. He opened the second letter. There were not many words on it, and the content was very brief. He was startled. Someone turned in the cold crystal. Hey, Dean, this name. Isn't he the seed target of this batch of scavengers? He was stunned for a moment, then suddenly laughed. This little guy is quite clever. He was able to pick up something from the hunter. He deserves to be the seed of the special training. He deserves to be the one who got the first place in the special training. He is worthy of the consortium's investment. His previous depressed mood suddenly improved. Originally, recruiting Dean was a happy event for the scavenger headquarters because they had seen Dean's resume. His body radiation value was extremely low. Although he was not a light physique, there was still a glimmer of hope for him to become a hunter. The only problem was that they were not willing to invest money to train him. Now it seemed that they could try. If he really became a hunter, it would also be a merit for him. He put the letter on top of the previous one. If it was another consortium scavengers who picked up the cold crystal and happened to encounter the letter from the hunter headquarters, he would most likely link the two together and come up with some conjectures. But now that the target was Dean, he would not associate it, because Dean had graduated from the scavengers' special training and was also a seed target. No consortium would be stupid enough to send such a person to be a spy. Secondly, during the scavengers' special training, all consortiums, including the military, were prohibited from contacting the scavengers. Therefore, when the scavengers graduated, the consortiums could only try their best to take out benefits to entice them. They could not contact them in private. That would break the rules. Chapter 75. At this moment, Dean had just finished his bath in the basement of the castle. He was sitting on the bed and chatting with Macon and others. It didn't take long for the door of the basement to be pushed open. A team of people came in. There were 4 guards escorting 2 doctors wearing white coats and masks. They were carrying medical boxes in their hands. Everyone is ready to be inspected. Take off your clothes. One of the guards shouted. Scott, who had many experiences, didn't put on his clothes. He just sat on the bed. Dean, Macon, and others could only helplessly take off their clothes. Fortunately, the 2 doctors were male. Otherwise, they would feel shy and embarrassed to be naked in front of the opposite sex. Look at the side. Well, turn around. The 2 doctors came to the outside of the cage and looked one by one. Dean and others followed their instructions and turned their whole body to let them check. What kind of injury is this? The doctor pointed to the scar on the back of Mason's hand. Mason quickly said, It's a bruise. It's been a long time. The doctor nodded slightly and carefully looked at the scar. He recorded in the book, The wound has scabbed. The injury time is estimated to be more than 4 hours. There is no swelling on the wound. Preliminary judgment is that there is no infection. After writing, he continued to look at the next one. Hey! Suddenly, another doctor was surprised. He stared at the slightly raised blood vessels on Dean's chest. He was startled. He looked closer to the iron pillar and found that it wasn't his illusion. He couldn't help but be surprised. Magic mark? When the other doctor heard his words, he was also stunned for a moment. He immediately looked over and was stunned. Dean's heart was moved. Magic marks? Do they know this? Scott, who was in the next cage, was also astonished. He said, Magic marks? Dean has a magic mark? Dean didn't think that Scott would know about it. But looking at his appearance, it seemed that he didn't recognize the red mark on his chest. Most likely he had heard about the magic mark from other channels, but hadn't seen it with his own eyes. The two doctors stared at Dean as if they had seen a ghost. How? Is it possible? Aren't you a scavenger? How can you have a magic mark? Dean was also puzzled. What are magic marks? Scott noticed that the doctor was looking at Dudian's chest. His face was full of curiosity. He heard Dudian's question and immediately said, Dean, this magic mark is the exclusive power of the hunter. It is the fundamental reason why the hunters are far stronger than us scavengers. It is said that the magic mark contains a variety of amazing abilities. Some hunters can see through everything. Some hunters can corrode metal. These abilities are derived from the magic mark. He looked at the red marks on Dean's chest. I didn't expect this to be the appearance of a magic mark. Dean, I didn't expect you to have a magic mark. No wonder you were so strong. It turns out that you are a hunter. He looked at Dean with envy in his eyes, but there was no jealousy. He knew that the birth of magic marks was related to one's body. Not everyone could give birth to magic marks. Dean was stunned. Was the place where the blood-colored worm was residing in his chest the magic mark? Everyone is a hunter? Doesn't that mean that he is a real hunter? The two doctors looked deeply at Dudian. One of them said, Although I don't know how you got the magic marks as a scavenger, but it should be related to your body. Can we test your body again? Dean had long been worried about the hidden dangers that the worm would bring to his body. He immediately agreed. Sorry to trouble you too. It's not troublesome. If the test is as we expected, you will be a hunter in the future. You don't have to be polite with us. The attitude of the two doctors was modest, and there was a smile on their faces. Dean was surprised. He suddenly realized the gap between a hunter and a scavenger. At the same time, his heart was quietly relieved. Since other hunters had magic marks, he was not special. There should be no hidden dangers. The two doctors let Dean stretch out his arm from the gap between the iron pillars to help him check. One of the doctors took out a small glass meter from the medical box. It was a radiation meter. Dean immediately understood that they wanted to test the radiation in his body. At the same time, he also guessed that the magic mark was mostly related to the radiation content in a person's body. After all, this was the biggest difference between a hunter and a scavenger. Soon, the doctor extracted the blood from Dean's finger and measured it with the radiation meter. Dean's vision was completely different from before. He suddenly saw the red line at the bottom of the radiation meter. It slowly crept up a few centimeters and then softly slid down. This time, he saw it very clearly. This red line was clearly a hair-thin worm. Could it be that there was a worm like this in every radiometer? Dean suddenly realized. No wonder in this technologically backward world, they were able to measure the radiation value of the human body. It turned out that it was through this mysterious worm. This worm was mostly the same as the light worm he had seen in the hunter's castle. It was a worm that had a special sensitivity to radiation. So low. The two doctors were surprised to see the reaction on the radiation meter. They looked at each other and suddenly realized that such a low radiation content. No wonder the magic mark was born. However, both of them felt strange. How could such a talent be assigned to the scavenger group? Was it a mistake of the consortium? They didn't dare to think too much. After all, this was a matter of the top and had nothing to do with them. They just had to do their own work. We will submit this to the top after the test. One of the doctors politely said to Dean, You have the physique of a hunter. I believe that the consortium will soon promote you to the hunter group. Congratulations. Dean was not used to their honorifics, but he thought that this was a world with a clear hierarchy. There was no need to be pretentious. He calmly nodded and said, "Thank you both." The two doctors smiled and said a few polite words. Then they checked Macon and Scott, as well as the three consortium scavengers and the new boy. They recorded the situation and left the basement under the escort of the 4 light guards. I didn't expect that Dean would unknowingly become a hunter. After the doctor and the guard left, Scott looked at Dudian in amazement. His eyes were full of surprise and flattery. This was a godsend opportunity to be in close contact with a hunter. If he could get a little protection or a little help from Dudian, then his future life would be much better. Even if Dudian said a few words, his share of scavenging in the consortium would increase a lot. This was the influence of a hunter. Mason, Zach, and Sham were equally surprised to see Dean. Their faces were full of envy and happiness for him. In the future, we will have a backer. Haha. Mason laughed. Zach said, "I didn't expect Dean to become a hunter. I doubt that I am dreaming. Isn't it?" I didn't react. Sham said, "I knew that Dean is a seed. As long as he performs well, sooner or later he will have the opportunity to become a hunter. I didn't expect that he would become one. Gee, he is so young. I don't know what reward the consortium will give to Dean." All three of them were a little excited. Dean looked at their happy appearance and smiled. He reached out and touched the magic marks on his chest. It seemed that the hunter had ambushed the black behemoth for the sake of this bloodworm. However, the hunter already had magic marks. Why would he need it? Could it be that even if he had magic marks, it could enhance his strength or enhance the ability of the magic marks? Speaking of ability, he thought of his super sense of smell. This should be the ability of his magic marks. Dean thought of Scott's words and said, "Do you know what the hunter's magic marks are? What kind of ability does it have? Will it be a threat to me?" Scott scratched his head and said, "I only know a little bit, but I have heard that there are a variety of abilities. As for whether it will be a threat to you, I don't know. But I don't think it will be a threat to you. All the hunters have this ability, but I have never seen any of them get into trouble. As for the specifics, when you're promoted to a hunter by the consortium, someone will tell you." Dean thought about it and no longer thought about it. Chapter 76. Outside the giant wall, Melon Consortium Area Number 8. The Scarlet Rose Consortium flag was inserted at the edge of the area. 3 figures quickly passed by the flag. The breeze caused the flag to flutter slightly. The speed of these 3 figures was incomparably fast, like 3 black cheetahs swiftly and nimbly flipping over and jumping over the broken streets. Occasionally, there would be collapsed buildings blocking the streets, but they would lightly step on the rubble and easily jump over them. Soon, the 3 of them saw 2 figures wandering aimlessly on the street in front of them. Their green eyes were empty and numb. Their clothes were hanging like rags. They exposed a lot of gray parts of their body. Humph! One of the 3 figures coldly snorted. There was a bit of cold and delicate feeling. It was a woman wearing scarlet soft armor. Her speed didn't slow down. She quickly passed by the 2 undeads and arrived in front of them. Then she passed in a straight line between them. With 2 plopping sounds, 2 heads fell to the ground like rubber balls. They rolled for a while and then stopped moving. The 2 figures behind the woman quickly passed by the corpses, and a strong wind blew down the 2 headless corpses. There are still undeads left. There really is a change in Area Number 8. The youth on the left looked back, and his face slightly changed. The youth on the right looked at the back of the scarlet soft armor woman. He sighed, "I hope Byrne is just playing around. Don't be distracted." The scarlet woman's eyes were cold. "Gale, do you smell my brother?" The youth on the left replied, "Not yet." "Oh." Suddenly, he exclaimed in surprise and stopped. He looked at a street on the right and said in bewilderment, "This smell, could it be that monster?" The scarlet woman suddenly stopped and stared at him. Gale's eyes flashed for a moment. "Come with me. Maybe your brother is here." Then he quickly flew along the street. Soon, the 3 of them came in front of a collapsed building. Gale quickly drilled into the collapsed building. The Scarlet Woman and the other youth followed behind him. They came to the front of a passage in the building. Gale jumped down from a hole in the passage. He heard a slight buzzing sound. He looked towards the source of the sound and raised his hand to light up a candle. Suddenly, the dark passage was illuminated. The three of them looked inside with the help of the dim light. Their faces changed. Sure enough, it's the Defiler. Gale took a deep breath. He was a little scared. The other youth was shocked. How can the Defiler appear in Area Number 8? This is a rare monster. How can it die here? It's still in its infancy stage. Its hunting level is 9. The Scarlet Woman carefully looked at the corpse. Her eyes swept around the dark passage. It was burned to death. It died in vain. Gale came back to his senses and said, "Look, the head of the fear-infected has been cut off. This should be the work of a novice. We all know that the brain of the fear-infected has nothing except for the brain matter. Moreover, those parts of its body were not removed. It seems that the person who killed it is likely to be a rookie hunter. There are no new hunters joining our consortium recently," the other youth said. The Scarlet Woman sneered. "That can only mean that the hunters from other consortiums didn't understand the rules and broke into our area." Gale slightly nodded. Suddenly, his nose twitched. His face slightly changed. "I seem to smell your brother's scent." "Huh?" The Scarlet Woman's eyebrows raised. Gale's face turned ugly as he said, "It's coming from the body of the fear-infected. It shouldn't be." The Scarlet Woman's face changed. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Gale held the flame as he approached the burnt corpse. He immediately saw a finger-thick soft armor fragment in the gap between its claws. The scent he smelled was coming from this fragment. "This." Gale picked up the soft armor fragment. His face turned ugly. "This is your brother's." The Scarlet Woman's complexion changed. Her pretty face was flushed red. Her dark pupils shrunk. She trembled as she slowly came in front of Gale. She looked at the soft armor fragment in his hand. She knew that he would never make a mistake with his scent-tracking ability. She also knew that if her brother met with the fear-infected that had reached the level 9 hunter level, what would be the end of him? Beast. The skin on the side of the Scarlet Woman's arm slowly peeled off, revealing 2 blood-red, scimitar-like blades. She slashed at the neck of the Festine. With a puff, the muscle fibers of the rotting corpse were extremely fluffy and were easily cut open by the blood blades on the side of her arm. The rotten blood sputtered on her face, but she didn't care at all. She swung her hands like a madwoman. Blood splashed. The bloodthirsty flies around the burnt corpse were scared away by her. "Bastard, bastard, bastard." As she tore apart the charred corpse with her arms, tears flowed out of her dark red eyes and fell on her delicate cheeks, washing away the blood on her face. Gale and the other youth had a complex look. They didn't stop her because they knew it was useless. Soon, the upper body of the charred corpse was cut into pieces by the blood blade. The Scarlet Woman looked ferocious. She grabbed its rotten body with her hand and tore its stomach apart. The extremely stinky and rotten smell flowed out along with the gastric juices and stained the Scarlet Woman's arm. She didn't care at all. She crawled in the gastric juices and only picked up some digested bone residue and metal pieces. "Beast, beast." The Scarlet Woman repeated these 2 words. She was so sad that she couldn't think of new insults. The corrosive gastric juices didn't have the slightest effect on her soft armor and bloody blades. Gale couldn't bear it and pulled her. "Don't be like this. Your brother may have escaped from its claws and is still alive somewhere. Get lost," the Scarlet Woman said in a cold voice. Gale sighed as he let go of her. The Scarlet Woman slightly gasped as she clenched her fists. Her beautiful face was full of ferociousness. "I want to find the person who killed this beast. A damn rookie hunter will never be able to beat it. It must have been seriously injured after fighting with my brother. That bastard must have killed him. I want him to die." Gale nodded. "We will help you. We will definitely find that guy. He dared to invade our area. We will never forgive him." The other youth said, "I think that person should have left some clues in the vicinity. Let's look for it. Maybe there will be some unexpected harvest." Gale nodded slightly. He looked back and pointed to the stone beside the hole. The blood on it should be left by that person. I remember the smell. Let's look around and see if there are any other clues. The Scarlet Woman saw where he was pointing and looked back. Her dark red pupils were extremely cold. She came to the front of the stone and raised her hand to touch the dried blood on it. A horrifying scene appeared. On the back of her white and tender hand, there were black, vein-like things breaking out of her skin. They wriggled and climbed to the stone as if they were licking the blood on it. Soon, the dried bloodstains gradually disappeared from the stone. Gale's face slightly changed, but he didn't say anything. He knew that this was the ability of her magic marks. Chapter 77. In the basement of the castle. Dean and the others rested after the doctors left. They hadn't had a good rest in the 10 days outside the giant wall. At the moment, they were in a cage. Everyone was completely relaxed and soon snored loudly. Dean didn't fall asleep immediately, but gently stroked the magic marks on his chest. The touch was extremely clear. He couldn't tell whether it was from his fingertips or from the magic marks. He felt as if his heart was being touched by his fingers. The cool feeling made his hair stand up. His nerves were instinctively tense. He could feel his heart beating faster when he exerted a little force. There was a bit of tightness in his chest. This magic mark. If it is destroyed, then my life will be greatly threatened. I might even die. Dean silently thought. He didn't expect that his life would be linked to the magic marks. To be precise, it was linked to the bloodworm inside the magic marks. He was lying on the bed, turning left and right, but he didn't fall asleep. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of the holy scripture of light on the table. He picked it up and gently opened it. He saw the flying characters written with goose feather. The first sentence made him squint his eyes. Light is the truth. Plants can grow because there is light in the world. Because there is light, we can see. Light can give people life. The creator of the light, the God of light, will protect all loyal to him. The opening of the scripture was the core of the scripture. The latter was a story that was beneficial to the light. To be precise, it was a phenomenon that everyone knew. It was because everyone knew that it couldn't be refuted, because the role of the light was too big. The scripture was basically right. Dean even felt that the scripture wasn't complete enough. The role of light. If there was no light, then there would be no life on earth. This point alone was better than tens of thousands of examples. However, Dean didn't believe in the God of light. The role of light couldn't be ignored, but what did it have to do with the Holy Church? Dean flipped through the book and roughly understood how to recruit believers. First of all, he would propose some natural phenomena that everyone knew about and incorporate them into his teachings. Then, he would list them out one by one. After reading them, most people would have a feeling of sudden enlightenment. Combined with what they had seen in life, they would immediately be convinced. Once he was convinced, he could add his own ideas into it, mix these ideas together, and instill them into the minds of others. If one's personality was not sound enough and his worldview was not firm enough, it would be difficult for him to distinguish the mixed ideas, and as a result, he would believe everything and become blind. Once they were blinded, they would become devout believers who would believe whatever they were told. What is mentioned above is only the appearance brought about by some light. There is no scientific basis to explain it. Just like what my father always said, the ancients were intelligent, but they lacked tools. They could only know how, but not why. People today are the same. Duddian secretly thought, after perfecting the tool and entering the microscopic level, we can explain the origin of light from the root, and even let people see the form of light. Father often said that all foolish beliefs are due to the backwardness of science and technology, which cannot be explained. Dean believed his father's words and became more determined to become an alchemist. The 3 days of cleansing quickly passed. 2 doctors would come over every day for routine checks to observe the physical changes of Dean and others. In fact, it was just a formality. They had seen too many such checks. Basically, the infected people would soon show symptoms. Only those who were extremely tenacious would carefully hide the scars and endure until the last moment of the 3rd day. But such cases were very rare. Dean and others changed into new black soft armors. The size of the armors was also measured according to their damaged soft armors. It was very fitting. Everyone, please. A guard of light came over and showed the way. Dean and others didn't see the knight with long black hair. They followed the guard of light and left the castle. As they came to the gate, they heard a voice. Mr. Dean, may I ask who is Mr. Dean? Dean was surprised to see a middle-aged gentleman wearing a black top hat and a cane in his hand. He looked up at Dean and the others. Scott, who was walking on the side, smiled and pointed at Dean. This is him. The middle-aged gentleman was surprised. He didn't expect that he would wait here to deliver a letter to a big boy, but he didn't dare to neglect. He quickly stepped forward and took out a letter. Mr. Dean, this is a letter for you. Dean glanced at the stamp and address. It was the stamp of the Melon Consortium and the address of the scavenger headquarters. He understood that the two doctors had reported about the magic marks. Dean nodded and thanked them. He put away the letter and gently opened it. The content was very simple. Find me at the top office of the headquarters. Top office? Dean naturally understood what the top office meant. It was where the scavenger's top secret was dealt with. In short, Peter and other scavengers were trained or held meetings on the top floor of the headquarters. It's about the nomination of you as a hunter. The headquarters is really fast. Scott laughed. Congratulations, You have been a scavenger and now you are a hunter. Maybe in the future we will meet again in the wilderness. Mia, who was next to him, was stunned. What's the situation? Hunter? Dean? Scott laughed. You don't know yet, but Dean has borne magic marks. He is a veritable hunter. Mia stared at Dean in a daze. Dean smiled and looked at Scott. Thank you for your guidance in scavenging outside the giant wall. It's a piece of cake. Scott smiled. He was very happy as he knew that Dean had remembered his favor. He immediately said, Mia and I will go first. After a few days the price of materials has been evaluated. We will meet again at the headquarters. Dean was surprised. The price of materials hasn't been evaluated yet, but thinking about those things, all of them were modern items from outside the giant wall. Many of them were things that people inside the giant wall hadn't seen before. It would take time to evaluate the price. Mason and the other two said goodbye to Dean after watching Scott and Mia leave. They sat in the exclusive carriage of the consortium and left. The other three consortium scavengers and a newcomer boy politely bid farewell to Dean. They also picked a consortium carriage and left the place. Chapter 78. Melon Consortium Scavenger Headquarters. The carriage stopped in front of the door. Dean got off the carriage and looked up at the huge sleeping building. He walked up the stairs step by step and came to the entrance hall. He saw that it was very empty inside. There were several consortium scavengers in front of the announcement board in front of the hall to browse the information. The bulletin board was dedicated to announcing the information that the scavengers needed. It was mainly about the changes in the various areas under the jurisdiction of the Melon Consortium or the changes in the neighboring areas. When Dean entered the door, he could see the information on the bulletin board. One of them was actually the message of Area Number 8. The general meaning was that Area Number 8 was temporarily blocked. Scavengers should not enter. Duddy knew that in addition to them occasionally being assigned by the consortium to scavenge in a specific area, scavengers were free to go to any area under the jurisdiction of the Melon Consortium. There were no restrictions. Therefore, most of the scavengers would come to understand the latest changes in each area before going on mission. It was to avoid encountering dangers like the one they were facing this time. After all, although these areas have been cleaned, but how could the undead and monsters pay attention to the lines drawn by people? They would often break into some areas that had already been scavenged, just like the one Dean met. After a glance, Dean went upstairs along the corridor inside the hall. Hey, Dean. Suddenly a voice came. Dean looked over and saw Peter coming out of the office with a cup of hot coffee. He smiled and said, Mr. Peter, the materials you picked up haven't been estimated yet. What are you doing here? Peter asked in a strange tone. Dean also felt strange. Hadn't he heard about his own things? Suddenly, he thought about it. Hunter's affairs seemed to be confidential. Ordinary scavengers could only rely on their qualifications like Scott to hear some gossip. But Dean didn't expect that Peter wouldn't get the news. He smiled and euphemistically avoided the topic. It seems that there is something the higher-ups want me to do. Peter froze for a moment. And suddenly thought of something. He frowned and said to himself, "It shouldn't be. Even if they suspect, they won't suspect you newcomers." Peter looked at Dudian's puzzled eyes and hesitated for a moment. He approached Dudian and whispered, "I guess they are looking for you about the undeads in the 8th area. I have heard about it. A few days ago, there was news from the Hunters' headquarters that they will thoroughly investigate the scavengers who entered the 8th area. However, there is no reason for them to suspect you newcomers. You don't have to worry too much, as long as you pay attention to your words." Dean couldn't help but be startled. His whole body was slightly erect. It was as if he had encountered an instinctive danger. But soon he found that he was overreacting. His face quickly returned to normal. "I was wondering. Mr. Peter, thank you for reminding me." Peter smiled. "I'm looking at you. Work hard." Then he left with the hot coffee. Dean looked at Peter's back and slowly turned back. The smile on his face had disappeared. His eyes slightly narrowed. He thought that the Hunter headquarters would investigate Area Number 8 and look for traces from a scene. He didn't expect that the scope of thorough investigation would be expanded to the scavengers. Although he wasn't afraid, but such a big action was enough to show that the Hunter headquarters was very serious about this matter. His mind quickly recalled the traces that he had dealt with. He suddenly thought of something. This magic mark was the ability of every hunter. So would other hunters have any special abilities like his keen sense of smell? Thinking of this, his fingers slightly clenched. His heart made up his mind. Even if the higher-ups investigated, he wouldn't admit it. He looked at the steps in front of him. His expression was calm as he walked step by step. The scavenger headquarters had a total of 4 floors. Each floor had guards. These guards were selected from the nobles of the Melon Consortium. Only the nobles had the right to recruit private armed forces. But the quota was limited. This was one of the basic requirements for a consortium to have a foothold. The door opened, and a middle-aged butler opened it. He looked up and down at Dudian and smiled. "You are the new member of the consortium, Dudian. Please come in." Dean nodded and entered the room. The dazzling golden light immediately shone on his body, and a faint fragrance wafted from every corner of the room. The floor he was stepping on was extremely soft. It was actually a dark red carpet. He quickly and accurately glanced at everything in the room. All the tables, chairs, sofas, desks, and oil paintings were extremely expensive. A compelling atmosphere of elegance and wealth crowded over him. He sighed deeply in his heart at the luxury. His gaze fell on a huge oil painting of a woman at the top of the room. It was a middle-aged man with a strong physique. He had thick eyebrows and starry eyes. He had a murderous and cold temperament. At the same time, he also had a bit of vicissitudes and laziness. The most eye-catching thing was the side of his chin, near his neck, where there was a finger-long scar. The position of this scar was shocking. It made people think that if it was half a centimeter away, perhaps the carotid artery would have been cut. "Little guy, come and sit down." The middle-aged man looked at Dean. There was a little surprise in his eyes as he smiled. Dean saw the gentle attitude of the middle-aged man. He knew that he was not going to inquire about the hunter. His heart was relieved. He went to the sofa opposite to the middle-aged man and sat down. "I've seen your resume. The radiation value measured before was only 0. 8, not even 1. The middle-aged man gently opened a book on the table and smiled at Dean. "This time you have just come back from outside the giant wall. The radiation value in your body has just broken 1. But the radiation content in your body is high. After a period of time, your body will automatically adjust and adapt. The radiation content should be reduced by 0. 1. In general, the radiation content is less than 1. Little guy, do you know that this is the radiation content of a hunter?" Dean nodded slightly. He was not surprised. Chapter 79. Dean was prepared for this question, so he honestly used the previous words, "I don't know. After I fainted, I got this." Fainted? Dayton was interested. How did you faint? Dean was calm on the surface, but his mind was spinning fast. If it was before, he would only vaguely say, I don't know. But when he heard Peter's words, he knew that the hunters had investigated the 8th area. Moreover, he understood that the magic marks were not unique to him, but every hunter had some strange ability. Although he had burned the body of the hunter, and the body was eaten by the black behemoth, but he wasn't sure if there were any traces left at the scene that he hadn't noticed and exposed him. Moreover, the death of a hunter and the birth of a hunter were both big events, so it was easy to associate them together. Thinking of this, Dean changed his mind. I saw a hunter fighting with a huge monster, and he was so scared that he fainted. Elder, what was that monster? It was so big. His fingers could not help but clench, and his body slightly trembled, as if he still could not stop the fear in his heart. Dayton looked at Dean's slightly trembling legs under the tea table, and his eyes showed a bit of thinking. This process only paused for a few seconds, and he quickly recovered his eyes. He bowed his head and sketched a line on the book. That monster is called Defiler. It is a monster with a name. Its body has been born with parasitic soulworm. Your magic mark is actually the body of the parasitic soulworm. Defiler? Dean murmured. Only now did he know the name of the monster he killed. But Dayton's last words surprised him. What he was about to ask directly, he suddenly became alert and said in a panic, Sir, what is the parasitic soulworm you mentioned? It entered my body? Then I am... Dayton raised his head and said with a smile, Don't worry. I said that the magic mark was the corpse of the parasitic soulworm. It was already dead when it drilled into your body, but even though it was dead, it was still connected to your body before it died. Its corpse turned into a magic mark, and the location of the magic mark is your fatal spot. It is as important as your head and heart. Remember to be careful in the future, and it is best not to reveal the location of your magic mark. Dean was stunned, but there was a burst of surprise in his heart. He had always been worried that the worm was in his chest, and he didn't know when it would bite him. He didn't expect it to be dead, so the hidden danger was much smaller. At the same time, he also captured a piece of information from Dayton's words. It seemed that everyone's magic mark position was different. His magic mark was on the chest, while the other hunters' magic marks were on other parts of their body. Little guy, you're very lucky, Dayton said with a smile. To be able to obtain such an opportunity, Lady Luck is looking after you. Originally, the headquarters intended to look at your performance. If your performance is good, then after 2 years, you will be given an opportunity to study at the Hunter College. Then you'll be able to buy the parasitic soulworm so that you can become a real qualified hunter. I didn't expect that you would accidentally become a hunter in advance. In this way, the headquarters can save the funds to buy the parasitic soulworm. Moreover, your magic mark is the Defiler. You may not know, but this is an extremely rare kind of monster. I believe that when you arrive at the headquarters, the other hunters will be very jealous of you. Dean said, This is all thanks to the consortium's cultivation. Elder, what is the parasitic soulworm that you said? Do you want to buy it? Don't we have it in our consortium? This is a kind of parasite that feeds on the monster's soul. Dayton didn't mind explaining to Dean. He smiled and said, Generally, it is a more special and powerful monster. Once this thing enters the human body, it will die. Therefore, the hunters can't give their magic mark to each other. That's why the number of hunters hasn't increased. Because there are too few monsters, it's very difficult to meet them. Although the consortium has the ability to capture the monsters, but there is no way to raise the parasitic soulworm. The only way is to directly raise the monster. But the monster is not allowed to be brought back to the giant wall, so we can only buy it from the Holy Church. They have the God of Light's cradle, which can preserve the living parasitic soulworm. But the price is extremely expensive. Dean was secretly awestruck. No wonder the Holy Church, as a religious organization, could recruit a large number of light guards and knights. Even all the consortiums had to give face to the Holy Church. In addition to the superficial belief, there was a deep penetration of substantial interests. This time I called you in secret. Your identity as a hunter hasn't been made public yet. Even the other senior members of our headquarters don't know about it. Dayton smiled and said, This is to protect you. I hope you don't spread the news. The headquarters will soon send someone to confirm your identity. After the confirmation, you'll be able to go through the identity procedures and become a member of our consortium's hunter team." Dean nodded slightly. In addition to protecting him, the real purpose should be to prevent other consortiums from knowing the news and secretly poaching me. "Oh, there's one more thing." Dayton suddenly remembered and said, "You submitted the 7 soul crystals, commonly known as cold crystals. The price of each one is 1 gold coin. Although your identity hasn't been registered yet, but this is in accordance with the proportion of the hunter's share. If you're a scavenger, you can only get 1 silver coin." Soul crystals? Dean knew the name of the dark blue ball. At the same time, he was secretly speechless. The proportion of the scavenger and the hunter's share was 10 times different. He was a seed target, so he had a 30% share. So, wouldn't the hunter get 300% share? Wouldn't the consortium lose money? Dayton saw Dude in surprise and laughed. "Anyway, you are going to the hunter's headquarters. Let me be frank with you. The scavengers will get 50% of the total cost of the consortium's transportation. The remaining 50% will be paid by the individual for the materials identification fee, consortium's transportation fee, and other handling fees and taxes. All consortiums are like this. We are not the only one." Dean was stunned. He couldn't help but secretly sigh. Businessmen's means of making money were really ruthless. Scavengers had to work hard to pick up materials outside the giant wall. They would even encounter life-threatening situations. They had to suffer from radiation, but in the end, they could only get a very small part of the things they brought back. Consortiums only needed to provide channels to the outside of the giant wall and other channels to get a lot of profits. It was simply an empty hand. It seems that the real powerful businessmen are not trading, but robbing. Dean felt that he had gained a lot of knowledge. Chapter 80. It's confidential. Dayton faintly smiled. But it's not a secret among the senior hunters. I can personally reveal 1 or 2 things to you. This thing is one of the raw materials of God's blessing. It can enhance physical strength, but if you use it directly, you will be infected by the resentment of the undead. It's easy to degenerate into undead or other monsters. Dudian was startled. He remembered that when he was branded with a magic mark, he seemed to have absorbed a soul crystal while he was unconscious, but nothing happened. Was it because of the magic marks? Can't a hunter use it directly? Dudian asked. Dayton shook his head, no. Dudian was stunned. His heart was pounding. Even a hunter couldn't use it? But he could. At least, from the moment he absorbed the cold crystal until now, he had not felt anything strange in his body. If there was really a change, then on the day of cleansing, the 2 doctors would definitely be able to detect something. After all, they were senior doctors with long experience. Magic marks. Hunter's magic marks were different, so their abilities were different. Dean's heart quivered. Was the real ability of his magic marks not the super sense of smell, but the ability to digest cold crystals? Or was the ability to digest cold crystals just one of the characteristics? Dudian couldn't help but get excited. If that was the case, then he could secretly use cold crystals in the future. There was no need to hand them over. Although a cold crystal was equivalent to a gold coin, which was 10,000 copper coins. It was equivalent to 10,000 yuan in the old era. But he had seen the cruelty outside the giant wall. Naturally, he wouldn't be confused by money. When you go to the finance department and show your identity card, you can get your gold coins. As for other materials, they are still being appraised in the Temple of Elements. It will take some time to estimate the price. Generally, it will take about half a month or at most 1 month. Dayton smiled. Dudian was surprised. Temple of Elements? Dayton smiled, but didn't elaborate. The people from the headquarters should come soon. You go outside and wait. Dudian saw that Dayton didn't want to say more. He got up and said, "Thank you, Mr. Dayton. I'll leave now." "Okay." Dayton looked at the middle-aged butler after Dean left the room. "What do you think?" "Very smart. A young fellow with great potential," the middle-aged butler said respectfully. Dayton nodded slightly, sighed, and said, "Yes, It's a pity. After all, he doesn't have a light physique, so his lifespan won't be long. Even if he doesn't die in the mouths of monsters, he will sooner or later be crippled by the corrosion of radiation, unless he can buy the light divine water. But the price of this thing is too high, and only top hunters have the capital to buy a little. What a pity. The middle-aged butler nodded. Dayton gently tapped the pen on the table. The little guy must know the truth about the death of the hunter in area number 8. But if he doesn't say it, then we can't interrogate him. Even the headquarters won't be willing to interrogate him. After all, they have lost a hunter, and it's rare to find a new replacement. Moreover, he has the magic marks of the fear-infected. That group of guys should leave it at that. The middle-aged butler nodded slightly. It said that the fear-infected's body was burned to death. He was a bit nervous when he spoke, but his eyes were very calm. There is no way to disguise it. I suspect that he was burned to death. Yes. Dayton nodded slightly. He naturally saw this point. Although Dudion's camouflage was very good, but his ability to see people was still extremely sharp. Melon Consortium. Hunter headquarters. In an office castle. Bang! A slender white palm fiercely hit the table. The palm belonged to a woman in scarlet armor. She angrily stared at the bald, middle-aged man behind the desk. She almost roared, "My brother is my only relative. Do you want my brother to die in such an inexplicable way? I have checked. Huashan Consortium and the military have recently recruited new hunters. I just want the headquarters to help me ask them personally." The bald, middle-aged man looked calm. He looked at the woman's spittle splashing on his face, but he didn't wipe it. He quietly said, "You should be clear that we have no evidence. Even if their hunters sneak in, they can only blame the patrolling hunters in area number 8 for their negligence. They didn't detect it in time. Besides, the forensic doctor has already done the autopsy. Your brother did die in the body of the defiler. He has been digested to the point where only some residue and soft armor fragments are left. I know you are angry, but the monster that killed your brother is already dead. What else do you want?" "I want revenge." The Scarlet Woman roared. "Even if my brother was killed by the fear-infected, I will not allow others to pick up the fruits of my brother's labor. There was no parasitic soul worm in the body of the fear-infected. There must be someone else beside it. Why? Why will my brother die in vain while he harvests the spoils of war?" The bald, middle-aged man calmly said, "I understand that you can't accept it for a while, but I will never allow you to do anything that will hurt the interests of the consortium. You'd better not make any small moves. The consortium will investigate this matter and give you an explanation." "Hurt the interests of the consortium?" The Scarlet Woman couldn't help but laugh. Tears welled up in her eyes. "My brother is dead, and you talk to me about benefits? Do you think I don't know how much benefits I have brought to the consortium over the years?" The bald, middle-aged man knew that he had made a slip of the tongue. He frowned slightly and said, "I've already said that the consortium will give you a satisfactory explanation. If we find that person and prove that he's from another consortium, we won't let him pass. You don't need to worry about this. However, you can't act on your own. If the other consortiums get hold of this, you'll suffer a great loss." The Scarlet Woman stopped laughing and looked at him mockingly. She didn't say anything and turned to leave. At this moment, the door of the room was suddenly pushed open. A guard trotted in and respectfully saluted the Scarlet Woman. Then he came in front of the bald, middle-aged man and said, "Sir, this is the news from the scavenger headquarters." The bald, middle-aged man frowned, but he still took the letter and opened it, quickly skimming through it. The bald, middle-aged man was surprised. He couldn't help but look at the back of the Scarlet Woman. Seeing that she didn't notice this, he was a little relieved. He quickly closed the letter and said, "I know. You can leave now." The Scarlet Woman, who was already at the door, heard the guard's words. Her figure suddenly stopped. Her eyes were slightly red and revealed a cold, murderous aura. Then she disappeared from the door. After the Scarlet Woman left, the bald, middle-aged man quickly took out a new letter and quickly issued an order. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.